Tonight, we're pulling off the highway and checking into the darkness of Texas itself, into those lonely motels scattered across the hill country, the panhandle, and the desert roads where the lights never quite reach. These are 20 true stories from people who stayed at the Wrong Texas Motel. Ordinary travelers who walked into lobbies that shouldn't exist, heard footsteps in empty hallways, and checked into rooms that were never supposed to be open. From flickering neon signs to front desks run by people who don't cast shadows, these are the confessions of those who thought they were just stopping for the night and found out some guests never leave. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake. They leave without subscribing. And by doing so, they miss out on the creepiest, spine-tingling stories that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight's just the beginning and the terror waiting down those Texas back roads is far from over. So, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments, because here, under the hum of a flickering vacancy sign, the night is long, the rooms are cold, and the stories are all too real. Now let's dive into the darkness. I was driving west out of Austin on a Monday evening, the kind of night where the sky turns the color of copper and the air hums with heat that refuses to fade. My name's Carl Dwyer, regional salesman for an appliance parts distributor based in Waco, and I've spent half my life on Texas highways. By the time you've seen as many motels as I have, they start to blend together. The same stale carpets, same flickering signs, same lukewarm coffee in the lobby. You stop caring where you lay your head as long as there's a bed and a shower. That night, I was headed toward Llano after finishing a long day of cold calls and rejections in Marble Falls. My eyes burned from the road, and I promised myself I'd pull over at the next place with a vacancy sign before I started drifting into the oncoming lane. It was close to midnight when I saw it. A glowing roadside inn just off Highway 29, the kind of place that looked freshly painted in the glare of its neon lights. The sign said, Hill Country Motor Inn. The V in vacancy flickered weakly, but the rest burned bright red against the night sky. The parking lot was mostly empty except for an old Ford pickup near the office. A few moths battered themselves against the glow, and the hum of the sign blended with the chirping of crickets. I remember thinking it looked cleaner than most roadside dumps, like someone cared enough to keep it alive. I pulled in, killed the engine, and sat for a moment listening to the ticking of the cooling motor. The air smelled faintly of rain and mesquite. Inside the office, the light buzzed overhead, and the air conditioner rattled in the corner. A man in a faded blue shirt sat behind the counter, his face half hidden behind a yellowed newspaper. He looked up when the bell on the door jingled. "Evenin'," he said. His eyes were pale and watery, and his voice had that hill country drawl that makes every sentence sound slower than it should be. "Need a room?" I told him I did, just for the night, heading toward San Angelo in the morning. He smiled, a small polite thing that didn't touch his eyes. "Lucky you," he said. "Got one left. Room 12. He slid an old brass key across the counter. Not a card key, not a plastic tag. An honest-to-God brass key with a chipped green tag that read 12. I paid cash, signed the ledger, and he pushed the receipt toward me. "Coffee in the morning starts at 6. Office closes at 9. Don't worry about the door, it locks itself." The motel had 2 wings forming an L shape around the parking lot. A few lights glowed in the windows, but most of the rooms were dark. Mine was on the far end, facing a stretch of field that disappeared into blackness. The door creaked when I opened it, and the smell hit me first. Lemon cleaner mixed with something faintly metallic like rain on old pipes. The room wasn't bad. Small, tidy, maybe dated by 30 years, but cleaner than most. There was a single bed, a nightstand with a rotary phone, and curtains with a desert pattern that might have been popular in the 1970s. I dropped my bag, turned on the wall unit, and sat on the edge of the bed listening to the hum of the compressor. I showered, brushed my teeth, and fell into bed without turning on the TV. Sometime in the night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps on the walkway outside. Slow, deliberate, the kind of pacing you recognize instantly when you've stayed in enough motels. Somebody walking the line of doors, checking each one. The handle on mine rattled once softly, like someone testing it. I froze, staring at the shadow under the door. It shifted, lingered for a few seconds, and then moved on. I told myself it was just the clerk checking the locks or maybe another guest who'd had too much to drink. Still, I reached over and set the chain on the latch before trying to sleep again. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of running water. It wasn't loud but steady like a creek beneath a bridge. I remember standing in the parking lot in my dream, staring up at the neon vacancy sign. Only this time the sign wasn't red, it was white, and the hum had turned into a soft whisper. It sounded like someone calling from far away, too faint to understand but persistent enough to draw me closer. I woke just before dawn, drenched in sweat with the air conditioner silent and the room uncomfortably warm. The clock said 5:42. I figured I'd shower again and grab some coffee before hitting the road. When I stepped outside, the world felt wrong. The sky was gray, heavy with early fog, and the parking lot was empty except for my car. No Ford pickup, no lights in the office, no sound but the faint buzz of insects waking up in the grass. The air smelled dusty, like a place that hadn't seen rain in months. I walked toward the office, key in hand, intending to drop it off, but when I rounded the corner, I stopped dead. The office windows were boarded over with warped plywood. The neon sign was gone, just a rusted frame and dead wiring hanging from the pole. The door was padlocked, the paint on it flaking off in long curls. My first thought was that I'd somehow walked the wrong way, maybe to an old section of the motel, but when I turned around, the whole building looked different. The paint that had been bright white the night before was now blistered and peeling. The roof sagged in places and weeds had taken over the parking lot. Dust coated everything, including my car tires. I tried the knob on the office door. It didn't budge. My heart was pounding by then, but I walked the length of the building to be sure I wasn't losing my mind. Every window was nailed shut. Some of them had the glass broken out and stuffed with rags or cardboard. When I got to my own room, I stopped again. The door to room 12 was still there, but the number had been scratched off. The key I held didn't fit the lock. The frame had been painted over, and the smell of mildew hung thick in the air. I took a few steps back and looked around. The highway was there, the same rolling hills in the distance, but there were no cars, no sound of engines, nothing. It was as if the world had gone silent. I don't remember getting back into my car, only that when I did, my hands were shaking so badly I dropped the keys twice before starting the engine. I drove toward Llano as fast as I could, refusing to look in the mirrors. At a diner on the edge of town, I pulled in for coffee and asked the waitress about the Hill Country Motor Inn. She frowned and said, "That old place? It's been closed 20 years. City condemned it after a fire. Killed the owner, poor man. People say it's still standing out there, but ain't nobody stayed there since." I told her that couldn't be true, that I'd spent the night there, paid cash, spoke to the clerk myself. She just shook her head and said maybe I dreamed it. I wanted to believe her, but when I looked at the brass key still sitting on the passenger seat, I knew I hadn't. The tag was gone, and the metal was black with tarnish, as if it had been buried for years. I drove home that day and didn't take Highway 29 again for months. When I finally did, curiosity got the better of me. I slowed down near the turnoff, expecting to see the crumbling remains of that motel in the weeds. But there was nothing. No driveway, no sign, not even a concrete slab. Just open field and mesquite brush. I've told myself 100 times it was exhaustion, maybe heat stroke or a dream so vivid it felt real. But some nights when I'm driving late and the highway stretches out in front of me, I swear I catch a faint red glow in the distance. And for a second, I see that flickering sign again. The hum of the neon fills the air and I can almost hear the clerk's voice saying, "Got one left, room 12. When that happens, I always look away, press the pedal harder and keep driving. Because part of me knows if I stop, if I even glance in the rearview mirror, I'll see it there again. The Hill Country Motor Inn. Lights burning bright against the Texas night, waiting for someone else to check in and never really leave." The first night they arrived, the ice machine was the only thing in that cracked motel hallway that sounded alive. Its low hum bled through the paper-thin walls of room 17, right beside the humming soda dispenser and the flickering exit sign that buzzed in its own offbeat rhythm. The couple, Hannah and Kyle, were both college juniors driving from Austin to Big Bend for the weekend. But after too many hours on the road, they'd stopped in a town called Sheffield, a place with one gas station, one diner, and this sad little roadside motel called the Western Sky. The clerk behind the counter had been half asleep when they checked in, A man who looked like he hadn't shaved or spoken to another person in a week. His name tag said Dennis. He gave them the key and warned them not to use the ice machine too late because, as he said, it acts up sometimes. They both laughed about it on the way down the hall. The machine looked ancient, a white block of rusted metal with a hand-painted sign that read ice in letters that had long since faded to gray. It made a deep mechanical drone, like the sound of an air conditioner dying a slow death. Later that night, after unpacking, Hannah went out to fill the little motel bucket with ice for their drinks. She crouched by the machine, lifted the flap, and listened to the cubes tumble down with a hollow clatter. Then, under that sound, she heard something else, faint like a hiss of air or the tail end of a whisper. It was so soft that it could have been the compressor, but as she leaned in closer, she swore she heard it again. A word, maybe two, something like, "Come here." Her pulse jumped and she shut the flap, shaking her head. When she came back in, Kyle was on the bed scrolling through his phone. She laughed it off and said the machine was creepy as hell. He teased her for being jumpy, saying it was probably air moving through old tubing, but when he went out later to grab ice himself, he returned quiet. He didn't say much except that it sounded weird out there. The next morning, they had breakfast at the diner across the street, trying not to talk about the motel. They were both tired, having woken up several times to the sound of the machine thumping like someone hitting it from inside. When they asked Dennis at the front desk if anyone had complained before, he gave a long sigh and said, "That machine's been here longer than I have. Makes noises sometimes when the weather changes." But it hadn't rained in weeks and the heat outside shimmered in waves over the asphalt. That evening, they came back from a short drive around the empty highway, the sun a blood-orange smear on the horizon. The motel parking lot was empty except for their car and one pickup with an out-of-state plate. The machine was humming louder now, almost in a steady rhythm like breathing. They could hear it from the far end of the corridor. Inside their room, they tried to ignore it. They played music, turned the air conditioning on full blast, but through all of it, the machine sound seeped through, low and pulsing, vibrating faintly in the walls. Around midnight, Hannah woke up to what she thought was Kyle talking in his sleep. Then she realized the voice was outside the door, whispering low, the same sound she'd heard from the ice machine the night before. It said her name, clear this time, drawn out as if someone were pressing their lips right against the vent. She shook Kyle awake, and he listened too. There it was again, his name this time. "Kyle," a slow, deliberate whisper. He stood, his breath held, and went to the door. The hallway light was flickering, casting dull flashes across the floor. The ice machine stood at the end, its surface sweating with condensation. The sound came from it unmistakably now. It wasn't random air pressure or old tubing. It was a voice. Faint but human, Kyle called out, thinking maybe someone was hiding nearby, but the only reply was the creak of the metal frame and the soft gurgle of melting ice. They barely slept after that. By dawn, they decided to leave early. But as Hannah was packing up, she realized the ice bucket was gone. She didn't remember throwing it away. When she went outside to check the hallway, it was sitting right in front of the machine, filled to the brim with ice that hadn't melted, though the machine door was closed. The cubes glistened, crystal clear, not the cloudy, half-melted kind the machine usually spat out. She reached for the bucket but froze. There was something embedded in one of the cubes, a dark shape, small and brown. At first she thought it was dirt, but when she bent closer, she saw it was the tip of a fingernail. Human. She screamed and dropped the bucket, ice scattering across the floor. Kyle came running, but before he could say anything, the machine groaned and spat out another chunk of ice. It clattered onto the tile, split open, and inside was something pale, skin. The sound of the compressor deepened, turning into a guttural hum that seemed to come from beneath the floor. Then the whisper came again, louder than ever from deep inside the chute. "Don't leave." The words were warped as if bubbling through water. Kyle grabbed Hannah's arm and pulled her back toward the room, slamming the door shut. They packed in silence, hearts pounding. When they went to check out, Dennis wasn't at the desk. The office door was open, the TV still flickering behind the counter. They left the key on the counter and walked out to their car. Just as Kyle started the engine, he heard the hum again, fainter this time, like it was carried on the wind. It rose and fell with the rhythm of the engine. Then, clear as day, through the static of the car's radio came the whisper, "Hannah." She gasped and turned the volume knob, but it only made the voice louder. "Kyle." The sound came not just from the speakers, but from the vents from the air itself. They drove out fast, heading west on the highway, the motel shrinking in the rearview mirror. For miles, neither spoke. Only when they reached the next town did they stop to catch their breath. Kyle went into a gas station restroom to splash water on his face. When he looked up, there on the mirror, scrawled in condensation, were 2 words, "Still here." He wiped it away, heart hammering, and when he came back out to the car, Hannah was sitting pale and trembling, her window rolled halfway down. She said she'd heard something whisper from the trunk. He opened it, shaking, and found nothing but their bags and the small cooler of ice they'd filled that morning before leaving the motel. It had somehow refrozen, frost spreading over the plastic lid. He opened it, and inside, beneath the thin layer of ice, lay the motel room key, number 17, perfectly preserved. They left it there, drove until nightfall, and never spoke of Sheffield again. Weeks later, Kyle's roommate at college said someone had called their dorm phone asking for him, a man's voice, rough and distant. When the roommate asked who it was, the caller replied, "Dennis from the Western Sky." He said Kyle had left something behind, that he should come get it before it melts. Then the line went dead, leaving only the faint hum of something mechanical, low and constant, like an ice machine breathing. Jack Whalen had been driving since sunrise, the hum of the highway and the endless roll of asphalt numbing him into a trance. He'd hauled loads all across the South, from the humid stretches of Louisiana to the flat, dusty guts of New Mexico. But Texas always felt different to him, older, lonelier, and somehow hungrier. That night, he was west of Bandera, cutting through a corridor of scrub oaks and mesquite that clawed at the darkness. The road ahead glinting with the oily shimmer of recent rain. He'd been planning to push through to Del Rio, but fatigue was crawling up the back of his neck like a swarm of ants. His eyes were burning, and every white line on the road seemed to drag longer than the last. Then he saw the sign, 24-hour lodging, vacancy, clean rooms. It was nothing fancy, just a flickering red neon arrow pointing down a cracked side road. But after 16 hours behind the wheel, it looked like salvation. He pulled in, the crunch of gravel under his tires echoing louder than it should have. The motel was an old L-shaped building, stucco faded and roof sagging under decades of sun. A single light burned above the office door, and a Coca-Cola machine hummed beside it. The place was quiet, too quiet, the kind of stillness that felt staged, like a movie set before the actors arrived. Inside, a small man with gray hair and sunken eyes sat behind the counter. His skin looked like paper stretched too tight over bone. "Evening," the man said without looking up from a ledger. "Need a room?" Jack nodded and slid his license across the counter. "Just for the night. I'll be gone by morning." The man's fingers moved with a slow precision as he wrote down Jack's information in the book. "All right. Room 7. 35 cash or 40 if you want a receipt." Jack handed over the cash. The man smiled faintly, revealing teeth that were too white for the rest of him. "Checkout's at 3 a.m., he said. Jack frowned. 3? That's a bit early, isn't it? Not our rule. Just how it's always been. The way he said it didn't invite further questions. Jack took the key and made his way outside. Room 7 was near the end of the building, beside a soda machine that buzzed softly. The door opened with a creak that sounded almost rehearsed. The air inside smelled faintly of mildew and cleaning fluid. A single lamp cast a pool of yellow light over the bed, where a neatly folded towel lay across the pillow. Everything looked clean enough, but too clean, like it had been arranged recently, not lived in. He kicked off his boots, dropped onto the mattress, and pulled his phone from his pocket. No signal, not even a flicker. He tried the CB radio next, but it only hissed faintly, as though the air itself refused to carry sound. Outside, the night was thick and close. Through the thin curtains, he could see faint lights flickering in the other rooms, maybe 5 or 6 in total. Shadows moved behind some of them, people walking back and forth or maybe pacing. He told himself it was none of his business. Truck stops and motels were full of weirdos, loners, drifters, and ghosts of people who'd made too many wrong turns in life. He'd met them all. Around midnight, Jack woke to the sound of footsteps outside. Slow, deliberate, heavy. He looked at the clock on the nightstand, 12:08. The steps past his window, stopped, then moved on. He waited a minute, then another, before pushing himself up and peeking through the curtain. The parking lot was empty except for his rig. The office light still burned, casting a long orange reflection across the asphalt. The footsteps came again around 1, this time from the direction of room 10. He could hear muffled voices like someone talking through a wall of water, and then a door closing softly. The air felt wrong, thicker somehow, like it was pressing against him. He turned the TV on, hoping for some noise, but all he got was static. Every channel the same, a faint gray shimmer and a low, almost rhythmic hum beneath it. He shut it off and lay back down. The clock's green digits seemed to crawl. At exactly 3 bars, the sound hit. All at once. Every door in the motel opened. The click of latches, the creak of hinges, perfectly synchronized. Then came the footsteps. Not one set, but many. Dozens, maybe. Shuffling, dragging, thudding across the concrete walkway. Jack sat up, heart hammering. He listened, every muscle rigid. The footsteps passed his room, moving in unison like a slow, synchronized march. He thought he heard breathing, too. A collective exhale that seemed to carry weight. Then silence. Absolute, swallowing silence. When he finally looked outside again, the lot was empty. Every light was out except the one above the office. The neon sign had gone dark. He sat there until the sky began to pale in the east, afraid to sleep, afraid to move. At dawn, he went to the office. The old man was gone, the chair empty. The ledger was still there, open to a fresh page. Jack glanced down. His name was written neatly, underlined twice, but beneath it were dozens of other entries, stretching back years. The names were all crossed out, every one of them, with the same note written beside each, checked out at 3-0. The ink color changed over time, but the handwriting never did. He flipped back a few pages. The same pattern, checked out at 3-monk always. He turned one more page and froze. Room 7 appeared again and again, sometimes only a few days apart. The names changed, different men, sometimes women, but the last entry for each was the same time. He looked closer. The second to last name caught his eye. Jack Whalen, written neatly in the same hand, dated exactly 1 year ago. For a moment he couldn't breathe. His fingers trembled as he reached for his wallet, half expecting the ID to show a different face. It didn't. He stumbled outside. The sun was up now, washing the motel in pale gold. It looked normal again, almost peaceful. The Coke machine hummed softly. Birds chattered in the mesquite trees, and yet every room door stood open, swinging slightly in the morning breeze. Inside each one, the beds were made, the towels folded neatly on the pillows. No luggage, no sound, no signs of life. He ran to his truck, fumbling with the keys, but when he looked in the rearview mirror, he saw the motel receding in the distance, and every door closing at once. Click, 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 perfectly in sync. He didn't stop until he hit the main highway again. By noon, he pulled into a diner outside Uvalde, hands still shaking as he ordered coffee. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, poured him a cup and glanced at his receipt when he paid. "You stayed at that place?" she asked. "Which place?" "That old motel west of Bandera. You can still see the sign from the road." He hesitated. "Yeah, last night." Her expression tightened. "That place burned down 10 years ago. Took a whole family with it. No one's rebuilt it since." Jack stared at her, the sound of synchronized footsteps echoing faintly in his ears, the way the doors had all opened and shut in unison. He left a 20 on the counter and walked out without another word. He didn't look back, not even when the wind shifted behind him and the faint hum of a neon sign buzzed to life, just long enough to spell a single word in red against the morning air. Vacancy. When Emily Carter reached the edge of San Marcos that night, the sky was bruised with low thunderclouds. She had driven all day from Corpus Christi after finishing a double shift at the rehab center. Her eyes felt gritty, her knuckles pale on the steering wheel. The rain had started around Kyle, a slow, steady mist that turned into sheets by the time she saw the glowing vacancy sign up ahead. The Valley Inn. The neon flickered, sputtering between red and blue, reflecting off the slick pavement like it was bleeding into the road. She was too tired to care about Yelp reviews or what kind of place it was. She just needed a bed and 4 walls that didn't hum with hospital lights. She parked under the overhang and grabbed her duffel. The lobby was small, with tile that looked like it had been mopped but never dried. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and mildew. Behind the counter stood a woman in her mid-40s, with hair tied up neatly and a smile that looked a little too practiced. She wore a maroon sweater and a gold name tag that said Lydia. Emily smiled weakly and handed over her ID. "Just one night," she said. The woman nodded, her smile never faltering. "Room 8, she said softly, sliding a key card across the counter. Her voice was smooth, warm, almost motherly. Emily paid in cash, signed the slip, and thanked her. The woman's eyes followed her as she turned to leave, her smile frozen like it had been carved into her face. The rain had slowed to a drizzle by the time Emily reached the door to her room. The hallway was narrow, with faded wallpaper patterned in vines and flowers that had long lost their color. Her shoes squeaked faintly as she walked. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was clean enough. A bed with stiff white sheets, a television, a nightstand with a cracked lamp, and a Bible half tucked under it. She set her bag down, kicked off her shoes, and sat on the edge of the bed. Her phone buzzed once, her sister checking in, but she ignored it. She was too tired to talk. She took a shower, the water running lukewarm, and crawled into bed without drying her hair. At some point in the night, she woke up. The TV was on, though she didn't remember turning it on. A faint static glow filled the room. For a second, she thought someone had come in. The remote was still on the nightstand. She turned the TV off and lay back down, her heart thudding against the pillow. The air felt heavier, colder, like the AC had kicked on without sound. Then she heard something. A soft dragging sound in the hallway outside. Not footsteps, not quite. More like fabric being pulled along the floor. It passed her door and faded. She stared at the ceiling until sleep finally won. When morning came, the light through the blinds was pale and thin. Emily dressed quickly and went back to the lobby to check out. The woman from last night wasn't there. Instead, a man stood behind the counter, tall, thin, and completely still. He wore a maroon sweater, the same as hers, with a gold name tag that also said Lydia. His hair was cropped short, his skin pale as paper, but his face, the same lines, same eyes, same smile. It was like looking at the woman's reflection through a warped mirror. "Checking out?" he asked quietly. His voice was flat, low. Emily hesitated, her fingers tightening around her duffel strap. "I paid last night. Room 8. The man looked down at the ledger in front of him. His expression didn't change. "No record," he said. "Cash payments must be logged daily. You'll need to pay for the room before you leave." Emily blinked. "No, I paid last night to the woman. She gave me the key." The man's smile didn't move. "There's no one else on shift overnight. Just me." She opened her mouth to argue but stopped. Something about his tone made her skin crawl. He looked like her, she realized. The same narrow jaw, the same faint freckles near the eyes. If she were older, male, and dead inside, maybe that's how she'd look. She swallowed, set the cash on the counter again, and turned to leave. The man's eyes followed her, unblinking, until she stepped out into the daylight. She told herself it didn't matter. A mistake, maybe some weird scam. She'd report it later if she felt like it. But halfway down the frontage road, she noticed the motel in her rearview mirror. The sign wasn't on anymore. The building looked darker, smaller, like it had been abandoned for years. She slowed down, frowning. The rain had started again, misting the windshield. When she looked back up, the motel was gone. Just an empty field and a rusted signpost leaning in the wind. She laughed, uneasy, and kept driving. Her mind made excuses. Wrong turn, exhaustion, bad visibility. She told herself the brain could play tricks after too many hours awake. Still, when she stopped at a gas station on the edge of town, she mentioned it to the clerk, an old man in a denim cap. He paused, then looked up from the register. "Valley Inn?" he asked. "You sure you stayed there?" She nodded. "Last night." He scratched his cheek. "That place burned down back in '07, gas leak. Killed the owner and his sister. Folks said they ran it together. Always creeped people out, those two. Looked like twins, though they weren't." The air in the store felt suddenly colder. Emily tried to smile, but her mouth wouldn't move right. She paid for coffee and left without another word. The drive north felt endless. Every exit looked the same, every billboard repeated itself like a skipping record. When she reached Austin, she decided to stop again, this time at a clean-looking motel near the highway. She parked, walked in, and froze. The woman at the counter looked up, smiling warmly. Same maroon sweater, same gold name tag. "Welcome," she said. "How many nights?" Emily's hand trembled as she set her ID down. She stared into those eyes, her own eyes reflected back. "I've already paid," she whispered. The woman's smile deepened. "Of course you have," she said. "We just need to sign you in again." That night, Emily woke in a room that wasn't hers. The sheets were wrong, the air heavy with mildew and rain. The TV glowed faintly with static. From somewhere outside came that dragging sound again. Closer this time, stopping just beyond the door. Then came a knock, soft but deliberate. She waited, holding her breath. A key turned in the lock. The door opened an inch, and through that narrow space she saw two figures in the hall. A man and a woman, both wearing maroon sweaters, both smiling the same too-wide smile. And behind them another shadow moved, a third shape with her face stepping out of the dark. It started as one of those places you barely notice even when you're standing right in front of it. A squat, low-slung motel on the edge of a service road that looped around toward Austin. The sign was missing a few letters, flickering between Sunset Motel when the power wasn't out. The paint peeled in long sunburned strips and the gravel parking lot was pitted with rain ruts and beer bottles. I'd been walking for 3 days after my car died outside Mason, so when I saw it, I didn't think twice. The man behind the counter wore a short-sleeved shirt with pearl snaps and a red name tag that read, Bill. His skin had the color and texture of someone who'd worked in the sun too long. He didn't smile, just slid a ledger toward me, told me it was 42 cash, and handed over a brass key on a leather fob stamped Room 7. He didn't mention the room I noticed right after, the one with its curtains always open. It was impossible not to see it. Room 9 faced the lot directly across from where I dropped my backpack. A single lamp burned inside, soft yellow through nicotine-stained glass, and though I never saw anyone at the window, I felt watched. The curtain hung slightly parted, like someone had just stepped away. I figured the guest had gone for ice or a smoke. By dusk, the light hadn't changed. When I came back with a microwaved burrito and a Coke from the front office, it still glowed the same, motionless. I asked Bill if Room 9 had cable, half joking, just to see if anyone was staying there. He didn't look up from the TV behind the desk. "Ain't rented that one in a long time," he said. I didn't sleep much. The walls were thin and the air conditioner rattled every time it kicked on. Sometime after midnight, I heard faint footsteps outside, gravel shifting under weight and a low hum like someone talking to themselves. I sat up, listened. The noise came from the direction of Room 9. I peeked through the blinds. The lamp was still on, the curtain still open, but the shadow of a figure moved behind it, pacing slowly back and forth. Too tall to be Bill, too steady to be a drunk guest. I told myself it was my nerves and lay back down. In the morning, I went to check out and noticed something odd. The key for Room 9 was gone from the board behind the counter. The others hung in neat rows, each brass tag catching the light, but the hook marked 9 was empty. I asked about it, but Bill said nothing, just muttered that housekeeping handled it. When I walked out, I saw a woman standing by the vending machine, pale face tilted toward the sunlight. She had a paper cup in her hand, long gray hair, and wore a faded dress that looked older than the building. I nodded politely. She smiled too long, and for a second I thought I saw her eyes move, not just shift, but move, like something living behind them was adjusting. I left fast. 2 days later, I came back through. I don't know why. The road west had turned into a dead stretch of asphalt and scrub, and part of me wanted to know if the place had been real at all. It was there, same as before, except the sign was darker and the air around it thicker somehow. I told Bill I needed a cheap room for the night. He looked at me longer than last time, like he was trying to remember something that didn't quite fit. "Only got 9 open," he said. He handed me a different key. No leather fob this time, just cold metal, old and scratched. The smell hit first, sweet and rotten at once, like wilted flowers in standing water. The curtains hung open, same as I'd seen from outside. The lamp was already on, though I hadn't flipped a switch. The carpet near the bed was darker in a square patch, almost black. I told myself it was a stain from old furniture. The bathroom door stood half open and I could hear dripping inside, slow, steady. When I checked, the sink was bone dry, but the mirror had fogged like someone had just stepped out of a shower. My reflection looked wrong, not distorted exactly, but delayed, like it lagged half a breath behind my movement. I lay on the bed with my boots still on, just staring at the ceiling. The air never cooled no matter how I turned the dial. Around midnight came the footsteps again, outside my door this time, then a pause. The handle moved, slowly. I sat up, staring. It turned halfway, stopped, then eased back into place. I counted to 20 before moving, crossed to the window. The parking lot was empty except for a single car, a tan sedan I hadn't seen before, parked at an angle facing my room. The interior was dark, but the driver's door hung open. I watched for a long time. Nothing moved. When I finally looked back at the bed, the stain had spread. It reached halfway to the nightstand, darker now, and it shimmered faintly in the lamp's yellow light. I leaned down thinking it might be water, but the smell told me otherwise. Something earthy, iron-heavy. I stumbled back and hit the curtain, and for a second I saw something reflected in the window. Someone standing exactly where I had been. Same height, same clothes. Only their face was turned toward the glass, watching me from inside it. I bolted out the door and ran to the office. Bill was asleep in a chair behind the counter, TV still flickering. When he woke, I demanded to know what was in that room. He rubbed his eyes and said, "You shouldn't have gone in there. Folks don't come out right when they do." He told me the motel had been built over an old homestead, that the last owner's son disappeared there in the 70s after living in room 9 for months without paying. They found the door locked from the inside, windows nailed shut, the lamp burning, and the bed soaked through with something they never identified. The father boarded it up for years before selling the place. Every few months, someone convinced him to open it again. They always left before dawn, if they left at all. I grabbed my pack and stepped outside, ready to keep walking until daylight. The sedan was gone. No tire tracks, no dust displaced. When I looked up at the row of rooms, every curtain was drawn except one. Room 9's hung open, glowing faintly through the glass. As I passed it, I could hear the same slow dripping sound, steady as a heartbeat. My reflection followed me in the window, a little slower each step until I couldn't tell whether I was the one walking away or watching someone else go. I didn't stop until the highway lights disappeared behind me. By morning, the sun rose over empty land and no sign of the motel at all. Just open road, dry grass, and the sound of my own boots crunching gravel. But sometimes, when I pass another old sign or a row of identical doors in some nowhere town, I still see a faint yellow glow where there shouldn't be one, and curtains that never seem to close. It was one of those blue Texas mornings when the light seems older than it should be, as if the sun had seen too much by the time it rose over the mesquite and scrub oak. Frank and Marlene Dillard had been retired for 7 years, living out in Mason County where the land folds into soft hills, and the wind sounds like the ocean. They'd bought a small limestone house off a back road, surrounded by cactus and live oak, thinking it would be peaceful. It was, mostly. The kind of peace that crept under your skin until you didn't know whether it was comfort or something else entirely. The place had come furnished, mostly antiques, the realtor had said, left behind by the previous owners who'd moved out suddenly. Marlene liked that kind of thing. She had a gentle fascination with the past, and Frank indulged it. He spent his mornings fixing up the fence lines, and she spent hers dusting off old picture frames and polishing brass lamps that didn't really shine anymore. It started with a simple cleaning. Marlene was vacuuming behind the nightstand in the guest bedroom when she found a book wedged between the wall and the wooden leg. A thick old notebook bound in cracked brown leather. It smelled faintly of cedar and age. She set it on the bed and called Frank. They both sat down, looking at it as if it were something alive. The first page was lined neatly in faded blue ink. At the top, written in elegant cursive, was guest register. Below it were columns labeled name, date of stay, and notes. The entries started in 1957. Most were normal enough: the Millers, 2 nights, pleasant stay. The Johnsons, weekend visit, stormy weather but cozy fireplace. Then, about halfway through, the ink changed. The names started repeating. Over and over again, Frank and Marlene Dillard. The dates spanned decades, long before either of them had been born. And the handwriting. Each line was signed differently, sometimes neat, sometimes shaky, sometimes bold, but always the same names. Frank frowned and ran his finger down the column. "That's got to be a coincidence," he said, though he didn't sound convinced. "People share names all the time." But even as he said it, his finger trembled. The latest entry was dated just 3 months earlier. The note read, "We've arrived home at last." Marlene stared at it, her throat tightening. "Frank, this notebook hasn't moved in years. How could anyone have written that?" He didn't have an answer. They sat there until the light began to fade, the cicadas screaming outside like static. Frank finally closed the ledger, placed it back on the nightstand, and told her to forget about it. But she couldn't. That night, Marlene dreamed of guests arriving. She saw them through the window, headlights cutting across the gravel drive, faces she couldn't quite make out. When she woke, the house was cold. The clock read 3:07 a.m. She nudged Frank awake. He mumbled, rolled over, and then froze. From the guest room came the sound of a page turning. Slowly, one at a time. The sound was unmistakable. Frank sat up, eyes wide. They both listened as it continued, flip, pause. Then silence. Frank grabbed the old flashlight from the nightstand and went to check. The guest room door was open. The notebook lay on the bed, opened to the last page. The flashlight beam caught the ink, fresh and glistening. A new line had been added. "The hosts will remember." Marlene covered her mouth. Frank stared at it, trying to rationalize, to find the trick in it. Maybe the ink bled through? Maybe we missed it before. He said it again and again, as if saying it could make it true. They decided to lock the notebook away in the cedar chest. Out of sight, out of mind. For a few days, life returned to normal. Frank fixed the porch railing. Marlene made peach cobbler for the neighbors. They even joked about their mystery book, but the house changed. The air felt thicker, like humidity without heat. Sometimes when Frank walked past the guest room, he swore he heard someone breathing softly behind the door. Marlene said she smelled perfume, an old powdery scent like her grandmother's dressing table. A week later, a letter arrived in the mail with no return address. Inside was a yellowed page torn from a ledger, one just like theirs. The handwriting matched the neat cursive from the early entries. "Thank you for your hospitality," it read. "We enjoyed our stay. Please keep the register updated." Frank drove into town that afternoon to ask about the property. The records clerk was an older man who'd lived in Mason all his life. When Frank mentioned the address, the clerk's expression changed. "That was the old Haskins place, wasn't it?" he said. "They ran a boarding house for travelers back in the 50s. Terrible business. Folks started disappearing on that road. Sheriff closed them down in 59. Heard the couple skip town. No one's seen them since." Frank left the courthouse with a sour taste in his mouth and a chill that wouldn't go away. He didn't tell Marlene everything, just that the house used to be an inn. But that night she noticed he'd been quiet, avoiding the guest room entirely. The next morning, the notebook was back on the nightstand. They hadn't opened the chest in days. It sat open to a blank page, a pen resting on top. Marlene's reflection in the window looked pale, unfamiliar. "It wants us to write," she whispered. Frank tried to burn it in the fireplace, but the pages wouldn't catch. The edges blackened and curled, but the writing stayed, glowing faintly like coals. When he pulled it out, the fire smothered itself out entirely. That was when they heard it, the knock. 3 slow raps at the front door. It was broad daylight, but the knock felt wrong. Too heavy, too patient. Frank opened the door to find no one there. Only a thin layer of dust on the doormat disturbed, like footsteps had come and gone. They didn't sleep that night. Marlene sat in the kitchen, staring at the window, saying she could see movement on the porch. Frank tried to call the sheriff, but the line only hissed with static. The electricity flickered. Around midnight, the radio in the guest room turned itself on, whispering faint fragments of voices, names, dates, sentences like those written in the ledger. When Frank went to shut it off, he found the notebook lying open on the floor, and his own handwriting filling the pages, neat and small. He hadn't written it. The words repeated over and over. "The hosts will be remembered." Marlene came up behind him and started to cry. Her name was written on the next line, underlined twice. By dawn, Frank packed the truck and said they were leaving. They didn't argue. The air outside smelled wrong, like wet earth after a flood. As they drove down the gravel road, Marlene looked back once and gasped. Someone was standing in the window of the guest room. 2 figures, actually, an older couple, pale and motionless. They looked almost exactly like them. Frank didn't turn around. He pressed the accelerator until they hit the highway. They never went back to that house. A month later, the property was listed again. New owners bought it quickly, drawn to its charm, its quiet promise of solitude. The real estate listing included a photo of the guest bedroom, neatly staged with sunlight spilling across the bed. On the nightstand, unnoticed by the photographer, sat a leather-bound notebook. The first page was already filled out. "Frank and Marlene Dillard," it read. "Hosts in residence. Please sign your stay." The rain had already started by the time Daniel pulled off Highway 281. He wasn't supposed to be here. He'd missed his turn near Johnson City, and his GPS had frozen somewhere south of Marble Falls, endlessly buffering, spinning its little circle of confusion while the signal bars blinked out one by one. The road was dark except for his headlights, which bounced off the mist and caught the occasional flash of reflective paint from an old guardrail. He'd been driving nearly 12 hours, his neck stiff, his eyelids heavy, and the glowing blue sign that read, Highway 281 in, vacancy, looked like a miracle. It wasn't on his map, but neither were half the things out here. The sign flickered weakly in the rain, the letters buzzed, and when he turned into the gravel lot, the car tires made that slow grinding sound that seemed louder than it should have been. There were only 3 cars parked out front, old ones, maybe from the 80s, and a single light burned behind the lobby window. He sat for a moment, engine idling, and felt something strange, like the air had thickened just slightly, as if time were holding its breath. Then he shrugged it off, killed the ignition, and grabbed his overnight bag. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of mildew and cigarettes. A small TV on the counter played an old black and white show, the sound low, the image distorted by static. Behind the desk sat a woman in her 50s, hair the color of straw, skin drawn and pale under the fluorescent light. She smiled when he entered, but it was the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "Evening," she said. "Room for one?" Her voice was raspy, not unkind, just worn out, like someone who'd been talking to herself for years. Daniel nodded, handed her a credit card, and she glanced down at it before saying, "Cash only tonight. Machine's been down all day." That seemed strange, but not strange enough to argue about. He handed her a 20 and she gave him a brass key, the old-fashioned kind with a tarnished tag that read Room 5. The hallway beyond the lobby smelled of old carpet and rain. Every door looked identical. White paint gone yellow at the edges, the numbers barely legible. His room was halfway down, next to an ice machine that hummed weakly but didn't seem to work. Inside, the air was still and cool, the wallpaper faded, the furniture plain. But it wasn't bad. A queen bed with clean sheets, a dresser with a mirror, a small TV that looked at least 20 years old. He took a few photos with his phone, the habit of a traveler documenting the strange charm of roadside motels, and then collapsed onto the bed, listening to the rain tick against the window. He meant to check his phone for directions, but his signal was still gone. The clock on the nightstand read 11:43. He fell asleep before it turned midnight. He woke to the sound of the TV turning on by itself. It was faint at first, static murmuring through the room. The screen flickered weakly, showing an image that seemed like a broadcast that wasn't quite tuned. Black and white snow, but every few seconds, a shape appeared in it. Not a clear one, just a shadow that seemed to move closer to the center of the frame. He reached for the remote, but before he could grab it, the TV switched off again. The room went quiet except for the rain outside. He sat there for a moment, heart pounding, telling himself it was just a power glitch. Old buildings had those. Then he lay back down and drifted off again. When he woke up, it was morning. Sunlight bled weakly through the curtains. Everything looked ordinary. He dressed, packed his bag, and pulled out his phone. The signal had returned, 2 bars now, maybe 3. When he opened his photos from the night before, something caught in his throat. Every image looked wrong. The bed was there, the lamp, the dresser, but not the same ones. In each photo, the wallpaper had a different pattern. The bedspread was floral, not striped. The lamp had changed shape. And in the last few pictures, before he'd fallen asleep, there was something else. A tall shadow standing beside the bed, faint but distinct, like someone caught halfway between motion and stillness. It wasn't a reflection. It wasn't a trick of light. It was a person. He stared at the screen until the battery warning blinked red. Then he looked around the room, really looked, and realized the mirror wasn't the same as the one in his photos. The frame here was metal, not wood. He blinked hard, checked again. The dresser had different handles. The curtains were green instead of beige. It wasn't just his memory, it was the room. Somehow this wasn't the same one he'd fallen asleep in. He went to the door and stepped outside. The hallway looked longer than before, stretching farther in both directions. The ice machine was gone. The wallpaper was newer, cleaner. He turned toward the lobby and walked, but every few steps it felt like the floor dipped slightly under his feet, like walking on uneven ground. When he reached the lobby, there was no one there. The desk was empty. The TV was still on, still showing the same old show, but now the picture was clearer, like a window rather than a screen. He could see a room through it. His room. The bed, the dresser, the window, and himself standing there watching. He stepped back, heart slamming against his ribs. The image on the TV shifted. The version of him inside the screen turned toward the camera and smiled, though his mouth didn't move in real life. Then the picture dissolved into static again. He ran outside. The air was hot and still, no rain, no clouds, just the pale glare of morning sun. The sign out front was gone. No letters, no frame, not even poles where it should have stood. The parking lot was empty. No cars, no gravel. Just cracked concrete stretching into a field of dry grass. His own car sat alone at the edge, dusted with pollen, as if it had been there for weeks. He got in, started the engine, and drove north until his phone finally found a signal strong enough to load a map. He zoomed out, searched Highway 281 in. Nothing. No listing, no reviews, no trace of it at all. By the time he reached San Antonio, he'd convinced himself it had to be a dream or some trick of exhaustion. He checked into a proper hotel downtown, ordered coffee, and plugged in his phone. When it powered back on, the photos were gone. Every one of them. In their place was a single new image, time-stamped 3:12 a.m., a photo of himself asleep in the bed at the Highway 281 Inn. The shadow beside him was clearer now, its hand resting lightly on his shoulder. And in the reflection of the TV screen behind them both, his own eyes were open, staring straight ahead. The hotel was one of those mid-tier chain places on the edge of a Texas highway, the kind built for families on road trips and oil field workers between jobs. The sign read Suncrest Suites, though the paint had faded so much that the crest was little more than a ghostly smudge. The Hensons had stopped there after driving 6 hours from San Antonio on their way to Amarillo. The kids were fussy. The youngest had spilled milk in the back seat, and Martha had complained for the last 100 miles that she couldn't take another minute in that car. So when they pulled into the Suncrest and saw the warm glow of vacancy lights flickering through the drizzle, it felt like a small mercy. The front desk clerk was a short man with a limp and a voice that carried the tired rhythm of someone who'd worked nights too long. He slid the keycards across the counter without much small talk, his hands spotted with something dark that might have been oil. Room 214, non-smoking. Breakfast from 6 to 9. No pets, no parties. The usual. He told them if they needed anything to call maintenance. Name's Hal, he said. I'm around if something breaks. The room smelled faintly of bleach and lemon cleaner like most motel rooms, but it wasn't bad. 2 double beds, a wall-mounted TV, a mini fridge humming low in the corner. The carpet had a few dark stains that looked like the ghosts of spilled coffee, and the wallpaper peeled slightly near the window. The kids jumped on the beds while Martha unpacked, humming to herself. Everything seemed ordinary enough until Tom tried to take a shower. It was about half an hour after check-in. The kids were eating vending machine snacks. The rain outside had turned steady, and Tom wanted to wash the road off him. He turned the knob to hot and waited. The pipes groaned like they hadn't been used in months, and then the water came, freezing cold. He gave it a minute, then 2, then 3. Still cold. He tried turning the handle back and forth, tapping the faucet, even flushing the toilet once to force pressure. Nothing changed. The water stayed frigid, sharp against his hand when he tested it. Guess they're out of hot water, he said, stepping out and wrapping a towel around his waist. Martha looked up from the bed, her brows furrowed. At this hour? It's barely 7. She tried it herself because that was the kind of woman she was. Someone who didn't believe things didn't work until she saw it with her own eyes. The same result. The sound of running water filled the bathroom, echoing off the tiles. The mirror fogged a little, but only from the dampness, not heat. She placed her palm under the spray and frowned. It's like ice. That's not right. Tom called the front desk. After a few rings, the same tired voice answered. Suncrest Suites front desk. Yeah, hi. Room 214. We're not getting any hot water in the shower. It's just running cold. There was a pause on the other end, too long to be normal. Then Hal said, All right, sir. I'll send maintenance up in a few minutes. Don't use it until then, all right? Tom agreed and hung up. 10 minutes later, there was a knock. Hal stood there with a small red toolbox and a flashlight clipped to his belt. He smelled faintly of cigarettes and metal, and his limp was more noticeable up close. Evening. "You said no hot water?" Tom nodded and led him to the bathroom. The maintenance man knelt down beside the tub, feeling around the faucet. He muttered under his breath something about pressure valves and corrosion. Then he twisted the knobs, listening. The sound of water filled the small room again. Hal said softly. "That's odd. What is?" Martha asked. "Usually when the hotline's blocked, you can feel it. There's a little give in the pipe, like trapped pressure. This one's tight." He shut off the water and used a wrench to remove the faucet plate. When he pulled it free, something wet and dark slipped out and fell into the tub with a soft slap. At first it looked like a clump of black rubber, but when the flashlight beam hit it, the shape became clear. Matted strands of hair, long and tangled, dripping water. "Oh, gross," Martha whispered. Hal frowned and leaned closer. "Could be old debris. Sometimes stuff builds up, but there was too much of it." He tugged gently with a pair of pliers and more came out, wet, heavy, knotted clumps clinging together. The smell rose quickly, a sour, earthy odor like mud mixed with something organic. Tom took a step back, hand over his mouth. "That's not debris," he said. Hal didn't respond. He pulled again, harder this time, and the pipe gave a low sucking noise like something being drawn through a straw. What came next made Martha gasp. At the end of the hair, pale flesh. A patch of scalp, torn and slick, still attached. The strands hung from it like roots torn from the earth. It swung slightly in the air as Hal held it up with the pliers, the water dripping into the tub in slow, rhythmic drops. Tom felt his stomach twist. "What the hell is that?" Hal dropped it into a small towel and stepped back, his face pale under the yellow light. "I don't know," he said quietly. "But it's human. Jesus." He opened his toolbox and pulled out a small wrench, tapping the pipe again. "I need to see if there's more." Martha grabbed the kids and moved them into the hallway. Tom stayed, unable to look away even though every instinct told him to leave. Hal twisted the pipe again, then looked up. "Sir, you mind calling the front desk for me? Tell them we might need a plumber. And maybe the sheriff." Tom went for the phone, but before he could dial, a low moaning sound came from the bathroom. At first he thought it was the pipes again, the air shifting through them, but when he looked back, Hal was frozen in place, staring at the tub. The drain was gurgling. Thick water, brownish red, started to bubble up, carrying more strands of hair. The smell grew worse, wet iron and rot. Hal dropped his wrench and backed away. "Get out," he said. "Now." They all ran into the hallway. Martha clutched the kids, Tom behind her. Hal slammed the bathroom door shut and pressed his hand to it like he was holding something back. The sound inside rose, a deep choking rumble, then silence. When they opened the door again, the tub was empty. The water was clear, the smell gone. The towel with the scalp was missing. Hal didn't say much after that. He told them he'd handle it and suggested they move to another room. "Room 210, 2 doors down." Tom protested, but Martha insisted. She wanted as much distance from that bathroom as possible, so they moved. The rest of the night was uneasy. The kids fell asleep eventually, but Martha couldn't stop pacing. Tom sat on the edge of the bed staring at the ceiling. He couldn't shake the image of that clump of hair, the way it looked alive in Hal's hand. Around midnight, the water in the new bathroom turned on by itself. Just a faint trickle at first, then steady. Tom got up, heart pounding, and went to check. The handle hadn't been touched. The sound came from the pipes deep within the wall. He turned the knob off. The water stopped, but the drain gurgled softly, like something whispering through the pipes. He didn't sleep at all that night. By morning, they packed up to leave early. The front desk was empty, just a note taped to the counter that said, "Back soon, Hal." The parking lot shimmered with the first light of day. As they walked to the car, Tom glanced toward the maintenance shed near the back of the property. The door was open slightly, and inside he saw movement. A figure bent over a sink, washing something dark under running water. He squinted. It was Hal, but his hands were covered in what looked like hair, matted and wet. He was combing through it slowly, humming something under his breath. Tom couldn't hear the tune, but it sounded like an old lullaby. They drove off without checking out. Martha told him not to look back. But he did once in the rearview mirror. For a second, he saw Hal standing outside the shed, staring at their car. In his hand, he was holding a small, pale clump of scalp, the hair dripping as he raised it slowly, almost like a wave goodbye. That afternoon, as they drove north, Tom stopped at a diner off the highway to use the restroom. He turned on the faucet to wash his hands. The water sputtered, coughed, and came out cold. Something dark floated up from the drain, catching the light for just a second before it slid back down. A single strand of long black hair. When Aaron McClure checked into the Lone Spur Inn on the outskirts of Fredericksburg, it was nearly midnight and the rain had started coming down in long, slanted sheets that shimmered in the red glow of the motel's flickering vacancy sign. He'd been driving for 7 hours straight, his eyes raw from the glow of highway lights and the faint silver blur of oncoming rain. The Lone Spur was the first thing he'd seen after miles of dark road and twisted oak branches clawing at the wind. It wasn't much, but it was dry, and the front office light was still on. The clerk was a thin, middle-aged man with gray hair slicked back and a quiet drawl that made every word sound like a sigh. His name tag said Dale. He barely looked up when Aaron walked in, water dripping from his jacket onto the old linoleum floor. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something older underneath, maybe mold or dust. Behind the counter, a wall of old metal keys hung on hooks, some tagged with faded labels that looked like they'd been typed on a real typewriter. Aaron asked for a room, something quiet where he could get a few hours of sleep before an early meeting in San Antonio. Dale handed him a key tagged 4A without much of a word, his tired eyes drifting to the rain beyond the glass doors. Aaron thanked him, paid in cash, and made his way down the covered walkway, counting faded door numbers as the rain pounded harder on the metal awning. Room 4A was clean enough, though the carpet was damp near the window and the air smelled faintly of old cigarettes. He tossed his bag on the bed, hung his wet jacket on the back of a chair, and turned on the heater, which hummed like an old truck engine. He didn't bother turning on the TV. The sound of the rain against the window was strangely soothing after the long drive. Around 1 a.m, just as he was starting to drift, he heard it. A soft sound through the wall, faint but distinct. At first he thought it was the pipes or maybe the hum of the air unit, but then it came again. A quiet, uneven sob. It was a woman's voice, muffled, as if coming from the room next door. He sat up and listened. The sound came from his right, the shared wall with room 4B. Another sob, then what sounded like a whisper, though he couldn't make out the words. It was the kind of crying that didn't sound recent, didn't sound like someone having a bad night. It was older than that, deep and tired, like a wound that never healed. He debated knocking on the wall or going outside to check, but something about the sound froze him. It wasn't loud or aggressive, just quietly wrong. He tried to tell himself it was none of his business. Maybe someone had checked in late. Maybe the woman was sick or drunk or just upset. He turned up the heater, stuffed a pillow against his ear, and eventually managed to fall asleep. In the morning, he went to the front office for coffee. Dale was there again, half asleep behind the counter, flipping through a dog-eared newspaper. Aaron hesitated a second, then mentioned the noise. "Hey, just so you know," he said, "I think the person in 4B might have been crying last night. You might want to check if everything's okay." Dale's hand stopped mid-turn of the page. He looked up slowly, his eyes narrowing in a way that wasn't suspicion so much as confusion. "4B," he repeated. "Yeah," Aaron said. "The room right next to mine." Dale blinked a few times, then leaned back in his chair. "There ain't nobody in 4B, sir." "Been locked up a long time." Aaron laughed a little, thinking it was a joke. "Well, somebody was in there last night. I heard a woman crying through the wall. Pretty clear." Dale just stared. After a moment, he stood and walked into the back office. When he returned, he had a small metal key on a chain. He looked reluctant as he handed it to Aaron. "Come on then," he said quietly. "Let's take a look." The rain had stopped, but the world outside still felt gray and wet, the pavement shining like oil. They walked side by side down the corridor, the air heavy with that damp post-storm chill. Dale stopped at 4B, fitted the key into the lock, and turned it with a hesitant click. The door opened easily, though the hinges groaned like they hadn't been moved in years. The room was dark and still. The curtains were drawn, the furniture covered in a thin layer of dust. The bed was made, but the sheets were yellowed with age. A faint smell of mildew and old perfume drifted out. Dale didn't step inside. He stayed at the doorway, holding the key like he didn't want to let it go. "Nobody's been in here since '92, he said. "Ain't been touched since the sheriff told us to leave it sealed." Aaron frowned. "Why?" Dale looked down the hall before answering. "There was a murder in this room. Woman traveling alone just like you. Checked in one night, never checked out. Some say her husband tracked her here. Others say it was someone she met on the road. Nobody ever got charged, but they found her right there on the bed, strangled. Folks said she'd been crying for hours before anyone found her. Aaron's skin prickled. The air in the room felt colder than the hallway, like the kind of cold that didn't come from bad insulation. He took a step inside despite the unease. The floor creaked under his boots. The wallpaper was peeling and a single fly buzzed near the ceiling. There was a cracked mirror over the dresser, and for a second he thought he saw a shadow move behind his reflection. But when he turned, the room was still. "You sure nobody's been in here?" he asked. Dale nodded. "I check every month or so. Same as always. Door locked, lights off." Aaron walked to the far wall, the one he shared with his room. He ran his fingers along it, half expecting to find a vent or thin panel where sound might carry. The wall was solid. Too solid. What was her name? He asked quietly. "Don't remember," Dale said, though his eyes flicked away when he said it. "Don't like talking about her. When I first started here, I used to hear things at night. Used to think it was just the plumbing. But once you hear that crying, you never mistake it for pipes again." Aaron didn't respond. He just kept looking at that wall, feeling a strange pressure behind it, like something breathing through the plaster. That night, he told himself he'd imagined it. Maybe the wind, maybe his exhaustion. But when the lights went out and the motel settled into its nighttime quiet, the sound came again. Softer this time, but closer. The same weeping, slow and fragile, like someone mourning a loss they couldn't let go of. Then a voice, faint enough to make him wonder if it was in his head. "Please, don't go," Aaron froze. His eyes snapped open, staring at the dim shape of the wall in the moonlight. He could hear the faint hum of the heater, the rain starting again outside and under it, the quiet sound of breathing coming from the other side. He got up, turned on the lamp and pressed his ear to the wall. The crying stopped instantly. The silence that followed was so complete it made his heart pound. The next morning he asked to switch rooms. Dale didn't argue. He gave him a key to 3C, didn't charge extra, didn't say a word. But as Aaron was leaving the lobby, Dale finally spoke. "Funny thing," he said without looking up. "You're not the first to ask for a new room after staying in 4A. Aaron didn't answer. He packed fast, drove hard, and told himself he'd forget about it. But that night in a Holiday Inn 2 towns away, he couldn't sleep. He could swear he still heard it faintly through the thin hotel walls. The same broken weeping, distant but persistent, like it had followed him. When he turned on the light, the clock on the nightstand flashed 3:17 a.m. The same time, he later remembered. The sheriff's report said the woman in 4B was pronounced dead. And even now, when the rain hits just right and the world goes still, Aaron swears he can still hear her voice behind him, whispering through walls that no longer exist, asking again in that desperate, trembling voice, "Please, don't go." The frame photograph hung just above the front desk, its glass catching the weak amber light of the lobby like a living eye. It showed 5 smiling people at a barbecue table, 3 men and 2 women, posed around a picnic spread in what looked like the motel's own gravel courtyard. The picture was sun-faded, maybe 20 years old, and whoever had taken it had caught that perfect kind of small-town cheer you couldn't fake. Beers raised mid-toast, smoke rising from a cheap grill, and a golden Texas dusk falling over everything. When Neil signed his name into the guest book that night, he didn't notice anything strange at first. The pages were yellowed, corners curled, but as he turned to put the pen back, his eyes drifted to the frame and a faint chill slipped through him. The names in the picture, printed neatly on a brass plate below it, were the same as the 5 above his own in the log. Derek Collins, Maria Collins, Jonah Kent, Elise Rowe, and Mark Tully. Same order. Same spelling. He even checked twice. He'd been driving all day, from San Antonio up toward Abilene for a delivery run, and when his old Ford started coughing halfway through Mills County, the first neon he saw felt like salvation. Silver Sky Inn, the sign had said, flickering blue in the wind like a bug zapper. Inside, the air smelled of lemon cleaner and faint mildew. A woman in her 50s with too much blush and a name tag that read Bev checked him in. She had a smoker's rasp and a way of smiling that didn't quite reach her eyes. He'd only meant to stay one night, just enough to rest his legs and get the truck checked in the morning. But now, staring at that photo, the back of his neck prickled. He pointed up at it casually. "Those folks regulars?" he asked. Bev looked up from the register, then at the photo. Her face softened into something unreadable. "Used to be," she said, then chuckled under her breath. "They were here the night we had the grand reopening back in '03, I think. We used to do barbecues out back for guests. Different time." She turned back to the computer. "Room 7's all yours, hun." Neil carried his bag down the narrow hall, the carpet flattened and darkened from years of foot traffic. A humming vending machine near the end threw off a steady low buzz. When he passed room 4, the doorknob rattled faintly, like from a draft. He paused, listening. Nothing followed. Room 7 was at the corner, next to a window that looked out toward the empty pool. Inside, the room smelled faintly of old bleach and rust. Beige walls, bedspread patterned with fake flowers, a lamp that buzzed when he turned it on. He tossed his jacket over a chair, sat on the edge of the bed and pulled off his boots. It wasn't until he went to sign the Wi-Fi card on the nightstand that he saw another odd thing. The card wasn't new. It had been reused, laminated over, handwritten at the bottom in blue pen. "Welcome Collins party." He frowned. Maybe the same 5 from the photo had stayed in this room. When he turned the card over, there was a faint brownish stain on the corner like coffee, or maybe something older. He tried not to think too much of it. Motels reuse things all the time. But when he went back to the lobby later to buy a soda, the photo caught his eye again, and this time something about it seemed off. The colors looked sharper than before. The grill smoke looked fresher, more defined. The woman on the left, Elise if he remembered right, seemed to be looking a little more directly at the camera than before, like she'd shifted an inch. He stood there staring for too long until Bev cleared her throat behind him. "Want me to ring that up, sugar?" she said, nodding at the soda. He mumbled thanks, paid cash, and retreated to his room. He left the TV on for company, reruns of some late-night talk show, but the static between segments kept cutting longer than usual. Once, during a break, the picture fuzzed and showed a quick flash of what looked like that same courtyard from the photo. It was too brief to be sure. When the show returned, his chest felt tight. He muted the TV and went to look outside. The courtyard was empty. The grill in the corner looked long, cold, covered by a metal lid surrounded by cracked patio chairs. But one of the chairs, the one nearest the photo's edge, was lying on its side, as if someone had just stood up in a hurry. He stepped back and closed the curtains. That night the sounds started. Not loud, just low murmurs, laughter, and the faint clinking of bottles. It came from outside near the courtyard, mixed with the occasional hiss of what might have been a lighter flicking. He lay still, half afraid to move, half sure it was a dream. Then came the smell. Grilled meat and smoke wafting through the air vent. He glanced at the clock. 12:43 a.m. He sat up, heart pounding. When he pulled the curtain open a crack, the courtyard lights were on again, casting pale yellow over the cracked pavement. 5 shapes stood around the grill. He could make out outlines only, 2 women, 3 men, talking and moving just enough for him to see they weren't shadows. But when one of them, a tall man with a baseball cap, turned slightly toward him, Neil stumbled back. The man's face was blank, like his features were melted, only faint impressions where eyes and mouth should be. Then the lights went out. The courtyard fell silent. He didn't sleep. By morning, the air smelled normal again. He went down to the lobby early, pale and unshaven. Bev was at the desk reading a magazine. "Everything all right in 7?" she asked without looking up. "You had people out back last night," he said. "A barbecue or something?" Her magazine lowered slowly. "No, sir," she said. "Ain't had anyone out there in months. Pools drained, grills rusted solid. You must have been dreaming." He wanted to argue, but something about her steady stare made his throat tighten. He just nodded and went to pour himself some burnt coffee from the lobby pot. When he turned around, the photograph was different again. The grill smoke was thicker now, rising straight toward the top edge. The woman on the far right, Maria, was holding something small in her hand that hadn't been there before. It looked like a motel key. And the man in the cap, Derek, had his head turned just enough to look toward the camera as if aware of being watched. Neil froze. "You changed that picture?" he asked. Bev squinted at him. "Change it? No, why?" He didn't answer. He checked out a few minutes later, tossing his key onto the counter. When he got to his truck, the morning sun made the windows gleam. Something fluttered against the windshield. A slip of yellowed paper caught under the wiper. He pulled it free. It was a page from a guest book. His own handwriting stared back at him. "Neil Harmon, room 7. But above his name were the same 5 again: Collins, Rowe, Tully, Kent, and under his, a new one already written in the same neat cursive: vacant. He started the truck, heart pounding, and pulled out fast. But halfway down the highway, his phone buzzed on the seat beside him. A text from an unknown number, a photo. He opened it, expecting spam, but it was the barbecue picture again, clear, bright, and new. Only this time there were 6 people in it. The 6 stood just behind Maria, half shadowed by the grill smoke, one hand holding a soda, face faintly familiar. It was him. He threw the phone onto the passenger seat and drove until the signal died. He never found the motel again, though he tried twice on later trips through Mills County. Locals said there used to be a Silver Sky Inn by the river before a fire in '04. 5 guests and a clerk had died during a barbecue out back when a propane tank exploded. A few months later, in a rest stop outside Fredericksburg, he saw something that made his knees weaken. A framed photo above the vending machines, same 5 smiling faces, same grill, same dusk sky, but now the brass plate at the bottom listed 6 names. Neil Harmon. Room 7. The highway was almost empty that night, except for the hiss of rain and the faraway hum of an 18-wheeler climbing a hill in the distance. Emma walked with her hood up, her sneakers soaked through and slapping against the asphalt as she made her way along the narrow shoulder. The air smelled of wet gravel and old oil, and every passing car made her flinch a little, even though none had slowed down in miles. When the neon sign came into view, a tilted rectangle buzzing in red and white that read, Driftwood Motel, hourly, daily, weekly, it felt less like finding shelter and more like walking into the kind of place that swallowed people whole. Still, she didn't have anywhere else to go. The office was a small glass booth attached to a row of rooms that looked like they'd been forgotten since the 70s. The light inside was yellow and sickly. A man behind the counter, gray-haired with a tired face, looked up from a newspaper when the door chime rang. His expression didn't change much when he saw her, just a brief flicker of suspicion followed by indifference. Cash only, he said before she even spoke. Emma nodded and slid a few wrinkled bills across the counter. 1 night. He pushed a key toward her without counting the money. Room 9, end of the row. Don't leave the heater on all night or it'll trip the breaker. His voice had the flatness of someone who'd said the same thing 1,000 times. Outside, the rain had picked up again. She jogged to the far end of the motel where the lights were dimmer, and the overhang leaked in 2 steady drips. Room 9 was wedged between a broken vending machine and a door marked maintenance. The key turned stiffly in the lock, and when the door opened, the smell hit her. Mildew, cigarettes, something faintly metallic under it all like rusted plumbing. The carpet squished faintly when she stepped inside. A bed took up most of the space, the sheets thin and stiff, the walls a fading shade of beige. There was a single lamp, a chipped dresser, and a television perched on a low table near the foot of the bed. It was one of those old boxy sets with static clinging to the edges of the glass even when it was off. Emma dropped her backpack beside the bed and sat down. The springs sagged under her weight, creaking like bones. She stared at the water stains on the ceiling for a long time, trying not to think about home. She had left 3 days ago. Her mother had been passed out on the couch when she slipped out. Her stepfather's truck gone from the driveway. She didn't have a plan beyond getting as far as she could on the cash she'd taken from the jar under the sink. San Marcos, maybe. Austin, if she was lucky. Somewhere big enough to disappear in. The rain softened to a steady patter. Out of habit more than interest, she turned on the TV. It came alive with a hiss of static and gray snow. She turned the dial, but every channel was the same. Then the picture sharpened suddenly. It wasn't a show or a commercial. It was her room. The same bedspread, the same curtain half drawn against the rain. The camera angle was wide, looking down from the top corner of the ceiling. For a moment she thought it must have been some kind of security feed the motel used. Maybe all the rooms were wired up for safety or insurance. But then she noticed the timestamp in the corner of the screen, 8:42 p.m., and glanced at the clock on the nightstand. It read 9:10. The footage wasn't live. It was earlier. On the screen she saw herself enter the room wet from the rain, drop her backpack and sit down. Then she stood and crossed to the bathroom door, exactly as she had. The image froze when she closed the door behind her. She watched the blank doorway on the screen for a few seconds, waiting for herself to reappear. The camera kept rolling, but the door stayed shut. The footage ran for another minute before flickering back to static. She stared at it, trying to make sense of what she'd just seen. She switched the set off. The hum of it lingered in the air for a moment after the screen went black. It was just an old tape, she told herself. Maybe the motel reused security footage. Maybe the TV was broken. She lay back on the bed, listening to the water dripping outside. The quiet felt heavy. She tried to close her eyes, but something about the silence made her uneasy. It wasn't total silence. There was the faint sound of electricity, a vibration in the air like a low note that never stopped. She turned her head. The TV was glowing again, faintly, even though it was off. When she pushed the power button, the image returned. The timestamp now read 10:02 p.m. The camera still showed the same room, but the light was dimmer, the lamp on the nightstand casting a pale circle across the bed. She wasn't in it. The bathroom door was still closed, but something moved near the edge of the frame, a shadow that slid along the floor, long and thin. Her mouth went dry. The shadow stretched, shifted, then disappeared out of sight. Emma sat frozen, her hands gripping the blanket. She turned off the TV again, this time pulling the plug from the wall. The screen stayed dark. She took a long breath and laughed quietly at herself, the kind of shaky laugh that doesn't come from amusement. She checked the bathroom just to make sure. The tile was cracked, the mirror spotted with rust, but there was nothing else there. She brushed her teeth at the sink, splashed water on her face, and told herself to stop acting like a child. When she came back out, the TV was on again. It shouldn't have been possible. The cord still hung loose against the wall, yet the screen glowed brighter than before. The timestamp read 10:29. She saw herself lying in bed, eyes closed, the blanket pulled up to her chin. She wasn't asleep now, she was standing, but the girl on the screen was. She watched for several seconds, the image wavering faintly, until the version of her on the screen opened her eyes. They stared straight ahead, directly at the camera, as if aware of being watched. The mouth twitched, just a small movement at first, then forming silent words. Emma leaned closer, straining to read them. 2 words repeated again and again, her own name. The sound came next, a faint clicking beneath the static, like a whisper filtered through white noise. Then came the voice. It was her voice, but wrong somehow. Thinner, higher, echoing through layers of distortion. "Why did you leave?" it asked. The image on the screen sat up. The real Emma stepped back, her heartbeat drumming in her ears. "Why did you leave?" the voice repeated. She grabbed her backpack and headed for the door, fumbling with the lock. But the latch wouldn't move. It felt cold, slick like it had been oiled. She looked back once more. The girl on the screen was standing now, head tilted. The camera zoomed slightly, or maybe the figure moved closer to it. Her face filled the frame, eyes wide and unblinking. The voice came again, louder, sharper. "You left me there." Emma stumbled away from the door, shaking. "Stop," she said, her voice cracking. "Stop it." She yanked the TV's cord again, even though it wasn't plugged in. The screen blinked off for a moment before lighting up once more. Now the timestamp read 11:01. The camera showed the bed again, empty this time. The door to the room was open just a few inches. Outside, a faint figure stood in the rain, unmoving. She pressed her ear to the real door. Nothing. Not even the patter of rain. The air felt heavy, as if the world outside had been muted. The television's hum filled the silence, steady and alive. When she turned around, the picture had changed again. It was still the same room, but the camera angle was lower now, looking out from under the bed. The image was darker, the colors washed to gray, and in that narrow strip of light between the floor and the blanket, she could see her own legs standing motionless beside the bed. Then something began to crawl out of the dark, a pale arm first, then part of a face. Emma screamed, a raw sound that didn't seem to belong in the world. She bolted to the door, slammed it with her shoulder, and it finally gave way. The air outside was colder than before, the lot drenched in mist. She ran barefoot down the length of the motel until the gravel tore at her soles. When she looked back, Room 9's window still glowed faintly with the flicker of static. She didn't stop running until she reached the highway. The lights of the Driftwood Motel faded behind her, swallowed by fog. Her breath came out in gasps, white in the cool night air. The road ahead was empty. She stuck out her thumb when the first headlights appeared. a pickup slowing to a stop beside her. The driver was a woman in her 30s with a cigarette hanging from her lips. "You lost?" she asked. Emma shook her head wordlessly and climbed in. The woman didn't talk much as they drove. The truck's heater blew warm air that smelled like dust. After a while, the woman flicked on the radio and a burst of static filled the cab. She twisted the knob, but it wouldn't tune to anything. Emma stared at the dashboard, her hands trembling slightly. Then faintly through the noise, she heard a voice again. Her voice. "Why did you leave?" The woman frowned. "Damn thing picks up all kinds of junk signal out here," she said, tapping the dial. Emma turned toward the window, refusing to look at the radio again. In the reflection, she could see her own face, pale, drawn eyes wide, and behind her, faintly, another shape in the dark of the back seat, leaning forward slowly. Miles away in room 9 of the Driftwood Motel, the TV flickered through its final images. The timestamp rolled forward to 2:13 a.m. The room was empty, the door open to the rain. Then, after a long moment, a figure stepped inside, wet hair hanging over its face, barefoot, carrying a small backpack. It sat on the edge of the bed, turned toward the screen, and smiled faintly as the static began again. On the second night of his fishing trip, Harold McKinney woke to the sound of dripping water. It was faint at first, a soft rhythmic plink somewhere above his head. He lay there half awake, his body heavy with the kind of exhaustion that came from a day in the Texas sun. A day spent knee-deep in the slow, moss-choked bends of the Pedernales River. He tried to ignore it. Maybe a leaky pipe, he thought. Maybe rain. But then he remembered that the old Riverside Lodge didn't have an upstairs. The second floor had burned down back in the 70s, leaving only the ground level, rebuilt cheap and low. He'd even joked about it with the owner when he checked in. "Guess that's one way to make sure no one stomps around above you," he'd said. The old man behind the counter, whose name tag read Cliff, had only given a weak smile. "Yeah," he'd replied, "no one up there no more." The dripping kept on. Harold turned on the bedside lamp. The glow revealed the rough wood ceiling, warped with age and stained in places where the roof had leaked before. But the sound wasn't coming from the roof. It was coming from directly overhead, as though someone was walking across an upper floor and trailing water behind them. Every few seconds came another drip. He sat up, rubbed his eyes, and listened. It wasn't random. The rhythm was steady, too steady, like something deliberate. He got up and walked barefoot across the thin carpet to the window. Outside, the moon hung low over the river, and the parking lot shimmered with humidity. His truck was the only vehicle in sight. No rain, no wind, just the low drone of frogs and something else, faint and distant. Footsteps maybe, crunching on gravel, or the house shifting with the night air. When he looked up again, he saw it. A dark patch spreading across the ceiling above the bed, like water seeping through old wood. He swore softly under his breath. Maybe the roof was leaking after all. He grabbed a towel from the bathroom, laid it on the bed, and moved the lamp so the light hit the stain. The dripping quickened. Plink, plink, plink. The stain grew darker, heavier, until one drop fell right onto the lamp's shade, sizzling slightly as it hit the warm metal. He leaned closer and saw that the liquid wasn't clear. It was brownish red, thick, almost oily. He jerked back. For a moment he thought it might just be rusty pipe water, but the smell hit him next. Iron and rot, the unmistakable stench of blood. He stumbled backward, his heart thudding. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. He ran out into the narrow hallway. The corridor lights flickered as they always did, humming faintly. The air smelled of mildew and wood polish. Cliff's office door at the end was shut, but a faint orange glow leaked from under it. Harold knocked hard. "Hey, something's leaking in my room." No answer. He pounded again, louder, nothing. He turned the knob, but it was locked. He thought about yelling again, but decided against it. The old man had looked half dead when Harold checked in earlier, hunched over the counter, his face the color of paper. Maybe he'd gone to bed early. Maybe he didn't hear. Fine, Harold thought. I'll deal with it in the morning. But when he turned back down the hall, he noticed something strange about the ceiling there too. Faint, uneven stains ran in lines, as though something wet had been dragged along from one end of the building to the other. They disappeared above room 3, his room. He went outside for air. The night was thick and still. the smell of the river strong and earthy. He stood in the gravel lot, staring at the shape of the lodge against the moonlight. You could see where the second story used to be, a dark line running along the top of the walls where the old framing had been cut off. The lodge was flat now, just one story high, the roof sloping slightly toward the river. Yet even as he watched, Harold thought he saw something move up there, a shimmer of darker shadow sliding across the roofline. It was gone in a blink, but the sound returned, drip, 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 this time faintly from outside, landing somewhere near the gutter. He could smell it now too, that same metallic tang. He took a few steps closer, craning his neck, and saw droplets pattering down from the edge of the roof. They glistened under the porch light, dark and slow, thick as syrup. He stuck out a hand to catch one, but when it landed on his palm, it was warm. Harold stumbled back, wiping his hand furiously on his jeans. He stared at the smear it left, rusty red, unmistakably blood. That was enough for him. He grabbed his truck keys from his pocket and decided he'd drive to the next town over, maybe find a motel there. He didn't even bother to pack up his tackle box or the few beers he'd left in the mini fridge. But when he climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key, the engine gave a sick grinding noise and died. He tried again. Nothing. The headlights wouldn't even flicker. The clock on the dash was dead too. He checked his phone. No signal. He could see the reflection of the lodge in the windshield, the single porch light flickering weakly, the rest of the windows black. Then from somewhere inside he heard footsteps again, slow, heavy creaking across the ceiling of his room. He got out, slammed the door, and stood listening. The noise stopped. For a long moment there was nothing. Then a faint sound like dripping again, but faster now, a steady patter. He turned toward the lodge just as the porch light went out completely. The darkness was instant and complete. He could barely make out the outline of the building anymore. Something inside began to move. He could hear it through the walls, the sound of water cascading, heavy and constant like a downpour inside the building. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence again, then a single creak, then another. Footsteps descending, slow, uneven, from a place where no stairs existed. Harold backed away until he hit the fender of his truck. He wanted to run, but where? The river behind him whispered through the reeds, black as tar. He kept his eyes on the front door, waiting for it to open, but it didn't. Instead, a dim light flickered in his room window, like the lamp had come back on by itself. He saw movement behind the curtain, something tall and dripping wet, swaying slightly as if suspended from above. His knees went weak. He forced himself forward, heart hammering until he reached the window. The curtain was half drawn, and he could see just enough to make sense of what he was looking at. It was his own bed, soaked dark. Water or something thicker was pooling onto the floor, and from the ceiling hung what looked like a human arm, gray and bloated, fingertips brushing the lamp. The skin shone slick in the light. More drops fell from its elbow onto the mattress below. He stumbled backward, gasping for air. His mind scrambled to make sense of it. It couldn't be real. There was no upstairs, nowhere for anything to hang from. He turned toward the office again, desperate now. The door stood slightly open. Inside, the old man was slumped over the counter, his head bowed. "Cliff!" Harold shouted, shaking his shoulder. The man's body was cold, stiff. His skin had the same pallid, waterlogged color as the arm he'd just seen. Behind the counter lay a stack of faded photographs. Harold grabbed one. It showed the lodge decades ago, before the fire, 2 stories tall with a row of windows along the upper floor. In the photo, 5 people stood smiling on the balcony. Cliff, younger and healthier, and 4 others. A woman, a man in fishing gear, a young couple. Someone had scrawled a date across the bottom, July 12, 1978. He flipped the photo over. On the back was a single line in smeared ink. The ones who stayed upstairs. Harold felt a sudden pressure in his ears, like the air around him had thickened. Then came the dripping again. He looked up. A wet spot was forming on the office ceiling directly above him. A drop fell onto his cheek and he recoiled, wiping it away. It smelled of rot. He turned to run but froze when he saw the front door. Water was trickling down the inside of the door frame, pooling across the floor. The walls groaned, and somewhere behind him came the faint creak of footsteps again, slow, steady, impossibly above him. He bolted outside, slipping on the wet floor, and didn't stop running until he reached the gravel road leading back to town. He didn't look back until he was halfway down the hill, breathing hard. When he finally did, he saw the lodge glowing faintly in the moonlight, the outline of a second story shimmering where the fire had once destroyed it. Figures moved behind those ghostly windows, dark shapes swaying, dripping, and one of them, tall and heavy, turned toward him. By dawn, a local deputy found Harold's truck still parked in front of the lodge, engine cold, keys in the ignition. The bed inside room 3 was soaked through, the ceiling above it perfectly dry. There was no sign of the guest. Only one thing was found that didn't belong: a small puddle of water on the office floor shaped like a single footprint, pointing toward the stairs that weren't there. A traveling software rep named Eric stopped for the night at a roadside inn just north of Junction, Texas, the kind of place that glowed faintly against the highway darkness, its flickering neon sign promising clean beds and cable TV. It was a long day of driving, and the rain had been falling steady since Fredericksburg. He parked beneath the buzzing light, grabbed his duffel, and walked into the small lobby where a man in a maroon vest sat behind the counter, flipping channels on a muted TV. The clerk smiled when Eric came in, polite but distracted. He had a soft drawl and a name tag that read, Ben. The whole lobby smelled faintly like lemon cleaner and damp carpet. When Eric said he needed a room for one night, the clerk handed him a key card labeled 207 without much conversation. Eric paid with his card, signed the form, and trudged upstairs to the second floor, where the hallway lights flickered behind plastic covers yellowed with age. Room 207 was at the far end. The card didn't work. He swiped again, red light. Again, red. With a sigh, he walked back down to the lobby, dripping rain onto the tiles. The clerk looked up blankly when Eric approached. "Hey, the card's not working," Eric said, placing it on the counter. The clerk frowned. "What room?" 207. The man tilted his head as if confused. "I'm sorry, sir, but I don't recall checking you in. Are you sure you've been helped here?" Eric blinked. "Yeah, you just checked me in like 5 minutes ago." The clerk smiled apologetically. "I've been sitting here alone all night. Maybe you're at the wrong motel?" Eric stared at him, waiting for the joke, but none came. The man took the card, looked at it, and said, "This one's not even coded." "It's blank." Eric's frustration flared. "Look, I just paid for this room. You swiped my card. You even gave me the receipt." The clerk opened the drawer, shuffled through the slips, and shook his head. "There's no record of you, sir." After a tense pause, he finally said, "Let's just try again. Maybe something glitched." He made a new card, ran Eric's payment once more, and sent him back upstairs. This time the door opened. The room was simple: stained carpet, faded curtains, the hum of an old air conditioner. Eric set his bag down, flipped on the TV, and let the sound fill the silence. But something about the room unsettled him. The air smelled stale, like someone had been smoking in it long ago. He turned off the TV, locked the door, and lay down. Sometime around midnight, a faint beep woke him. He looked toward the nightstand and saw the light on his keycard flicker once, then die. He didn't think much of it until in the morning, he stepped out to grab coffee from the lobby and returned to find his card dead again. Downstairs, the same clerk was there, except this time he had on a different tie and his name tag said Mark. "Morning," Eric said. "My card demagnetized overnight." Mark frowned. "Which room?" 207. Mark hesitated, glanced at his computer, and said, "I don't have anyone in that room right now." Eric gave a dry laugh. "You have me." Mark's face didn't change. "I think you might be mistaken, sir. We haven't rented that room in weeks. There's a maintenance issue up there." Eric's stomach turned cold. No, I stayed there last night. Your coworker, Ben, I think, checked me in." Mark looked genuinely puzzled. "We don't have a Ben here. It's just me and the owner, and he's in Houston for the week." Eric stared at him, waiting for the punchline that never came. Mark offered to check the logbook to clear things up, but every page for the past 2 days was empty. No Eric, no card transaction, nothing. When Eric went back upstairs to prove it, room 207 wouldn't open at all. The red light blinked every time. He banged on the door, but it sounded hollow, like it led to an empty wall. The more he pressed the handle, the more it felt wrong, like the doorframe had shifted slightly overnight. Mark came up behind him. "Sir, please. That room isn't available. You'll have to leave." Eric was too confused to argue. He showed the clerk the key card, the receipt, his credit alert on his phone showing the charge. Mark looked at them all with the same calm detachment. "That charge isn't from us. Our merchant name is different. Eric checked. The name under the transaction was Sunset Lodge, which matched the neon sign outside. But beneath it, in tiny gray text, was another phrase he hadn't noticed before. Legacy system, discontinued account. He stood there for a long moment before finally gathering his things and leaving. He got in his car and drove 2 hours north toward Brady. But around noon, when he stopped for gas, he pulled up the motel on his phone out of curiosity. Every map he checked showed nothing at that exit. No listing, no building, not even a marker for the side road he'd turned down. That night, when he pulled into another motel, this one a clean, bright chain off Highway 87, he checked in easily and tried to shake off the weirdness. The woman at the counter smiled, took his card, and handed him a key marked 207. His hand froze. She noticed. Something wrong? He forced a laugh. Just déjà vu. He went up, opened the room, and set down his bag. But when he turned around, his key card blinked twice, then went dark. The next morning, it wouldn't work again. He went back to the desk, trying to joke about it, but when he said his room number, the woman frowned. Sir, we don't have a room 207. The rooms stop at 206. He blinked. That can't be right. I was just in it. She turned her screen around to show the layout. 2 floors, each with 103 rooms. No 207, no one named Eric on the log. He looked back toward the hall where he'd come from. The air felt colder. He could still smell that faint lemon cleaner and damp carpet. He walked back down the corridor, heart pounding, counting the doors. 204, 205, 206. Then the wall. Nothing beyond it. Still, his bag was gone. He went back outside and looked up toward where his window should have been. A blank stretch of brick met his gaze. When he checked his phone later, the charge for the previous night had disappeared. In its place, the old one from Sunset Lodge had reappeared, this time with the note, "Transaction settled." That night, at another roadside motel 2 towns over, he didn't even ask what room they gave him. But when the clerk slid the key card across the counter, he didn't have to. It was marked 207, and when he looked up, the clerk was smiling the same way Ben had. The faint scent of lemon cleaner in the air, and the TV behind him was frozen on a blank gray screen that showed nothing at all except static and a single blinking word in the corner. Welcome. The storm came in sudden and mean that night, the kind that didn't give you the polite whisper of rain before it hit. 1 second the highway was clear and quiet. The next it was alive with sheets of water hammering down, lightning ripping open the sky over the hill country. I'd been driving west from Fredericksburg toward Harper, my wipers beating hard against the windshield, the yellow lines vanishing beneath rivers of runoff. That stretch of road, Highway 290, had always made me uneasy even in good weather. Too many memorial crosses on the shoulder, too many stories from locals about wrecks that didn't make sense. But that night, what caught my attention first wasn't the storm. It was the red glow in the distance, bleeding through the rain. At first I thought it was brake lights. Then it pulsed, flickered, and I realized it was a neon sign half hidden by the rain. A bright red vacancy sign buzzing faintly through the downpour, letters uneven and humming like a dying insect. It was attached to an old roadside motel, one of those single-story strips you used to see in postcards with stone walls and peeling turquoise doors. I could barely make out the name through the water on my windshield, Hillview Motor Lodge. The sign crackled again, and I swear for a moment the word "no" lit up beside it, so it read "no vacancy," before the N sputtered out and it went back to its red invitation. I pulled in mostly to get off the highway. The tires hissed through puddles as I rolled into the lot, which was almost empty except for a single pickup parked near the end. The storm was still breaking over me, thunder echoing in the limestone hills beyond. I shut off the engine, and for a moment all I could hear was rain, hammering on the roof and the buzz of that sign. When lightning flashed, I caught sight of something strange. The vacancy sign had gone dark completely for a second, and in that flash I saw a figure standing in one of the doorways. A man, I think, though he didn't move or wave or do anything at all. Just stood there until the next crack of lightning, and then he was gone. The office light was still on, so I grabbed my bag and ran across the lot. Inside, the air smelled like wet carpet and dust. A small TV on the counter showed the local weather, the screen snowy with static. Behind the counter was an older woman, her hair gray and neatly pinned, wearing a sweater that looked decades old. She smiled at me in that tight, practiced way of people who've spent years in customer service. "Evening," she said. "Rough night to be out." "Yeah," I said. "Didn't expect the weather to turn this bad. You got a room?" She glanced toward the window where the red glow of the vacancy sign bled faintly through the rain. "Plenty of rooms. You're my first guest tonight." She slid a clipboard across the counter. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded. I signed my name and noticed the column beside mine. Names, dates, room numbers. The last entry was from 2 days ago. Someone named Daniels. Room 3. "Take room 5, she said, handing me an old metal key. "It's dry and the heater still works. Don't mind the flicker. Power's been touchy in storms." I thanked her, took the key and made for my car. The sign outside crackled again, the vacancy letters flickering unevenly. When I looked up, it went dark just as thunder boomed. Total darkness for a few seconds until lightning split the sky and lit everything silver white. I saw the same doorway as before, room 3 this time, and the faint outline of someone standing just inside, barely visible behind the rain. When the lights came back, the figure was gone. I tried to shake it off. Room 5 was small and plain, with linoleum floors, faded curtains, and a faint mildew smell. The storm outside beat hard against the window, the red reflection of the sign pulsing across the wall. I turned on the small TV, which only caught static, and sat down on the bed. That's when I noticed something. There was a dark patch near the window, a faint outline of a handprint smeared across the inside of the glass. The condensation from the storm made it glisten, as if it had just been pressed there moments before. I wiped it away, but it came back after a while. I tried to ignore it, telling myself the humidity was playing tricks. Around midnight, the power flickered again. The heater died. The sign outside buzzed, flared once, and went dark. The silence that followed was heavy and wrong. I don't know how else to describe it. It was as if the storm itself had stopped breathing. No rain, no thunder, no wind, just the faint ringing in my ears. Then something scraped against the door, a slow drag like metal on wood. I sat still, listening. It came again, closer this time, then a soft thud. I got up and peeked through the peephole. Nothing. But as I turned back, I heard the TV behind me flicker to life. Static again, but this time the screen wasn't empty. Through the fuzz, I could make out what looked like the motel lot. It was hard to tell. The image warped by interference, but I could see the sign, dark, and what looked like a person standing underneath it. The camera angle was strange, like it was coming from above, maybe from one of the corners of the building. The person started to move, walking toward one of the doors. My door. I froze. The figure stopped at room 5, their outline shimmering through the static, then leaned close to the camera as if staring through it. The TV hissed louder. I yanked the plug out of the wall and the screen died. The silence returned, thick enough to choke on. Then I heard it again, the drag of something heavy outside, followed by the faint sound of a key turning in a lock. Not mine, but close. Room 3. I pressed my ear to the wall, listening. A door creaked open, then shut softly. The sign outside buzzed to life again, glowing faintly through the curtain. When I peeked out, room 3's window was lit, and for a second I saw movement inside. Someone pacing slowly back and forth, their silhouette jerking in the red light. Then the sign flickered once more and went dark. The light in room 3 went out with it. The next morning, the storm had passed. I stepped outside, the air heavy with the smell of wet asphalt and cedar. The sign was still dark, no hum, no flicker. I walked to the office to check out, but the door was locked. Through the window, I saw the desk empty, the TV still showing static. I knocked a few times, but no one came. Then I noticed the guest log still sitting there. My name was on the second line from the top now. Below it, in the morning light, was a new entry written in shaky handwriting. Daniels, room 3, dated last night. My stomach turned cold. I went to room 3. The door was unlocked, hanging open slightly. Inside, the bed was unmade, the lamp knocked over. A smell hung in the air, iron and damp wood. I didn't go further. I just backed away and drove off. As I pulled onto the highway, I checked my phone for service. Nothing. But as I looked back through the mirror, the sign flickered to life again. Vacancy burned bright red for just a moment before half the letters died. Now it read simply ACY. I didn't stop driving until I hit Junction. Later, when I told a gas station clerk what I'd seen, he looked up from his paper, eyes narrowing. "You say you saw the Hillview sign?" "Yeah," I said. "Red neon, right off 290. He shook his head. Ain't been any neon signs out that way for years. That old motel burned down in 1998. They say when the sign goes dark, someone dies inside that hour. I wanted to laugh, but the memory of that flickering red light in my rearview mirror wouldn't leave me. That night, as I checked into another roadside motel far from Fredericksburg, I glanced through the rain-streaked window before turning in. There, faint and distant across the horizon, was a dull red glow, and for just a second I could have sworn it spelled vacancy. The storm outside had passed sometime after midnight, leaving the world in that strange quiet that only follows hours of wind and rain. The curtains in the motel room still trembled slightly when a car rolled by on the wet road, its tires cutting through puddles like a distant whisper. The place was called Hilltop Motor Lodge, though there wasn't a hill in sight, just a long, flat stretch of Texas Highway 16 outside Kerrville. The kind of road where old neon signs buzzed through the dark and the smell of cedar hung in the air. Emily had booked it because it was cheap, and because after 6 hours of driving back from visiting her mother in Fredericksburg, neither of them had the energy to go another mile. She'd fallen asleep almost immediately, her head tucked into Daniel's shoulder, the sound of dripping water from the bathroom sink marking the seconds in the silence. At first, Daniel thought he was dreaming when the knock came. 3 dull, careful raps. Not loud, not urgent, like someone trying not to wake the others. His eyes opened slowly, his mind swimming through the fog of half-sleep. He glanced toward the red digits on the alarm clock. 6:12 a.m. The faintest gray light leaked through the curtains. Then came another knock, slightly firmer this time. Emily stirred beside him. "Who is it?" Daniel called out, his voice dry. There was a pause. Then a soft, polite voice through the door. "Complimentary breakfast, sir?" He blinked. Complimentary breakfast? The motel hadn't mentioned that. When they checked in the night before, the old man behind the counter hadn't said a word about any kind of food service. In fact, he'd barely spoken at all, just slid the keycard across the counter and mumbled something about keeping the curtains shut at night. Emily sat up, her hair messy and eyes squinting. "Did he say breakfast?" "Yeah." Daniel swung his legs over the edge of the bed and rubbed his face. "That's weird. I didn't think they did that here." There was another quiet knock. "Complimentary breakfast," the voice repeated, still calm, still polite. Daniel looked through the peephole. A man stood outside in a faded gray uniform, the kind with old motel stitching above the breast pocket. The tag said Earl. His skin was pale, so pale it almost looked translucent, and his eyes were downcast. He was holding a silver tray. Daniel couldn't make out much else through the fisheye distortion, just that the man's shoes were wet. Emily frowned. "Don't open it yet. That's creepy." "I'll just tell him we're fine." Daniel unlocked the door halfway and cracked it open. The attendant smiled faintly, lips thin and pale. "Morning, sir. Complimentary breakfast in bed." He lifted the tray slightly. On it were 2 plates. Each had 3 strips of raw bacon laid neatly side by side. Beside them, 2 small white towels, wet and glistening as if they'd just come from a sink. No utensils. No napkins, no juice. Daniel stared at it. We didn't order anything." The man tilted his head slightly. "It's complimentary. For all staying guests." His voice was so soft it barely rose above a whisper. Emily, now standing behind Daniel, whispered, "What the hell is that?" The attendant didn't blink. "It's best eaten soon, before it cools." Daniel's unease sharpened into something colder. "Look, we don't want this. Thanks, but we'll just—" "Everyone eats," the man said gently, still holding out the tray. "That's policy." Emily pulled the door shut hard, the latch clicking in place. "That's it. We're leaving. That guy's insane." Daniel turned to the peephole again, but the man was gone. No footsteps, no retreating silhouette. Just the gray light of dawn and an empty walkway. They began throwing clothes into their bags, the urgency rising between them like static. Emily went to the bathroom to wash up, but she froze the second she turned on the tap. The water came out pink. Not brown like rust, pink diluted and cloudy. She shut it off instantly and stared at the sink. There were dark streaks near the drain, like something had been wiped away hastily. "Dan," she called, her voice trembling. "There's something wrong with the water." He came in, saw it, and his throat tightened. "We're leaving. Right now." When they opened the door, the tray was sitting directly outside their room. They hadn't heard it placed there. The raw bacon had darkened, slick and glistening in the dim light. and the 2 towels had been unfolded. They lay across the tray in the shape of a body, arms outstretched, head-shaped folds at the top, perfectly arranged. A faint smell of bleach and something metallic hung in the air. Emily gagged. "Oh my God, what the hell is that supposed to be?" Daniel kicked the tray aside, the silver clattering against the concrete, and they hurried toward the parking lot. Every door they passed had an identical tray sitting outside. Raw meat, wet towels, room after room. When they reached their car, Daniel jammed the key into the ignition, but the engine wouldn't turn over. The headlights flickered weakly once, then died. He tried again, his hands shaking, nothing. Emily looked toward the office. The vacancy sign buzzed, the neon faint and pulsing. "I'll go to the office," he said, opening his door. "Stay here." Emily grabbed his arm. "Don't. I'll be right back." He jogged toward the office, his shoes splashing in shallow puddles. The door was unlocked. Inside, the front desk sat empty, the smell of mildew heavy in the air. A single ceiling fan turned slowly above, blades dripping from the humidity. The guest ledger lay open on the counter. Daniel leaned over to look. Every name on the page was the same, his and Emily's, written over and over again in shaky, looping handwriting. He backed away, the skin on his neck prickling. A faint sound came from behind the door marked "Employees Only." It was rhythmic, wet, like something being dragged across tile. "Hello?" he called, no answer. Just that steady sound, and the faint hum of the fluorescent light above. He took one step closer, and the door creaked open an inch on its own. The smell that came through was putrid and sharp. Inside, he could make out a sink, a long counter, and several trays stacked high with raw bacon and rolled towels. Something was dripping from the counter to the floor, a slow, steady patter of red that wasn't water. Then he saw a figure standing in the corner. It was the attendant, Earl. His gray uniform was soaked through, clinging to his body. He was cutting something on the counter with a dull knife. Daniel couldn't see what it was, only that the movements were slow, deliberate, practiced. Earl turned his head slightly, his voice barely a breath. "Guests should eat while it's warm." Daniel stumbled back, slamming into the counter and knocking the ledger to the floor. He bolted out of the office, sprinting toward the car. Emily was standing outside now, staring toward the rooms. Every door was open. The trays were gone. Inside each room, shadows moved, slow, pale shapes shifting just beyond view. "Start it!" she screamed as Daniel jumped in. He twisted the key again, and this time the engine roared to life. As they sped out of the lot, Daniel glanced in the rearview mirror. The motel sign flickered violently, the word "vacancy" flashing red against the gray sky. Then for a split second it went dark. They didn't speak until they reached Kerrville proper, until the sunlight broke through the clouds and the world felt solid again. Daniel pulled into a gas station, hands still shaking as he filled the tank. When Emily came out of the restroom, her face was pale. "Dan," she said quietly, holding out her hand. There was a folded white towel in it, damp. This was in the sink. He stared at it, then at her. The towel was identical to the ones on that tray. He reached out slowly, but she dropped it. When it hit the pavement, something small and pink fell from its folds, a piece of raw bacon, slick and glistening in the morning light. Neither of them spoke on the drive home. But later, when Daniel unpacked their bags, he found a small silver tray tucked between his shirts. Perfectly clean, except for one faint handprint pressed into the metal, pale, wet, and unmistakably human. On her first night at the Cedar Hollow Inn, Jenna thought the quiet would be a blessing. After years working in the chaos of a downtown Austin hotel, this roadside place, 15 rooms, a vending machine humming in the corner, and the faint smell of rain-soaked cedar, seemed like an easy transition. The manager, a broad man named Gary, showed her the basics. Room assignments, call transfers, security camera monitors that flickered occasionally but still worked fine, he said. He left at 10, and she took the counter seat, her first solo night shift. It was just past 11 when the first call came. The line blinked on the switchboard. Room-to-room call, line 12. She picked up, her voice a little too cheerful. "Front desk, how can I help?" A pause, faint static. Then a woman's voice. "Can you connect me to Mr. Hanlon, please? Room 6. Jenna looked at the registry sheet. Every guest name neatly written in Gary's blocky handwriting. Room 6, empty. She smiled politely into the receiver anyway. "I'm sorry, ma'am, there's no Mr. Hanlon checked in tonight." The line went dead without another word. She frowned, glancing at the wall of brass room keys behind her. Room 6 hung untouched, key in place. Probably someone drunk or confused, she thought. Happens all the time, but 20 minutes later the phone rang again. Same voice, calm but insistent this time. "Please, I need to speak with Mr. Hanlon. He said he'd call me back." Again, Jenna checked the ledger. Again, room 6. Empty. "Ma'am, I'm afraid there's no one by that name staying here." Static again, longer this time. Then a soft sigh. "He checked in this afternoon, you must have him there. Please, can you just put me through?" Jenna glanced at the monitor showing the hallway. Each door was shut, lights dimmed, no movement. She decided to humor the caller. "Hold on," she said, pressing the transfer key that would normally redirect to the room. She hesitated. The light for room 6's line shouldn't have been active. Gary told her the internal line was disconnected months ago after some guest tore it out of the wall. Yet there it was, glowing faintly green. She pressed it and her stomach turned when she heard a click on the other end. No voice, just a low sound, like breathing. Not close to the receiver, but in the room. She could almost hear the air shifting, the faint creak of floorboards. She hung up. The desk felt colder now. She rubbed her arms and tried to laugh it off. Old wiring, feedback. This place had probably seen 50 storms tear through it since the 80s. At midnight, she did her rounds, walking the length of the hallway with the flashlight Gary had left. The carpet smelled faintly of mildew, and the buzzing fluorescent light near room 6 flickered like a dying insect. She stopped there, eyeing the door. Dust had gathered along the baseboard. The handle showed no fingerprints. She jiggled the knob. It was locked, as expected. She started to turn back when she heard the faintest thump from inside, like someone shifting their weight in a chair. She froze, then leaned closer. "Hello, maintenance?" she called quietly, pretending that was her purpose. No answer. She bent down slightly and saw that under the door, faint yellow light glowed against the carpet. She returned to the front desk, heart beating faster than she liked to admit. When she checked the keys again, room 6's was missing. By 1:30, the calls resumed. Not just the woman anymore. A man this time. His voice was gravelly, uncertain. "Can you tell Mr. Hanlon I'm here? He asked me to stop by." Jenna hesitated, trying to keep her tone steady. "I'm sorry, sir. There's no one by that name registered." He chuckled softly. "Sure there is. He never leaves that room, everyone knows that." The line went dead. She stood up, pacing behind the desk. She looked at the cameras again. The hallway view glitched for a moment, the image twisting into gray lines, then stabilized. In the second of distortion, she swore she'd seen the door to room 6 open just a crack. The rest of the building stayed quiet. No footsteps, no doors, no sound but the steady hum of the soda machine. She told herself she was imagining things. Her first night, alone, tired. But when she sat back down, she noticed something new. On the counter beside the guest ledger lay the key to room 6. She hadn't heard it drop, hadn't seen anyone approach. Her hand shook as she picked it up. Cold metal, damp somehow as if it had been outside in the rain. She stared at it for a long time, debating. Finally, she grabbed the flashlight again. The hallway seemed longer this time. Her footsteps echoed softly. When she reached the door, she saw the faint yellow light still glowing beneath it. She turned the key slowly, half expecting it to resist. It didn't. The lock turned cleanly, smoothly. She pushed the door open. The room smelled stale, old cigarette smoke, and something sweet, rotting. The curtains were drawn, but the bedside lamp was on, casting an amber light across a made bed. Everything looked untouched except the phone. It lay on the carpet, cord cut, receiver resting beside it. Dust outlined where it had sat on the nightstand for years, yet there were fresh prints on the receiver. Then she noticed the mirror. It hung opposite the bed, cracked through the center, but her reflection looked oddly delayed. When she moved, it seemed to lag by a heartbeat, like an old video. She whispered to herself, "Who's Mr. Hanlon?" And as she said it, the reflection's lips didn't move. A sound came from the bathroom. Slow drip, steady, then the creak of a hinge. The door there wasn't fully closed. She shone her light and saw moisture along the floor tiles, as though the shower had just been used. The curtain fluttered slightly. She stepped closer, the air turning colder, her breath faintly visible. She reached out to pull the curtain back, and the bathroom light flickered on by itself. The tub was empty. The faucet dripped dark water, rust-tinted. But on the fogged mirror, letters began to appear, written from the inside of the glass. "Leave the line alone." She stumbled back, dropping the flashlight. It rolled, casting spinning light over the floor. When she looked down, she saw footprints forming slowly across the carpet, as if someone heavy and wet was walking toward her. They stopped just a few feet away, and then the bedside phone rang. She bolted, slamming the door behind her and locking it out of reflex, though she knew she was the one outside now. Back at the desk, the switchboard blinked. Room 6 calling. Her trembling hand hovered over the button. She almost answered. Almost. Instead, she picked up the main line and dialed Gary's number. It went straight to voicemail. She left a shaky message about what she'd seen, begged him to call back. While she was speaking, the phone beeped. Call waiting. Line 6 again. She hung up and stared at the blinking light. The hallway camera showed the door to room 6 now wide open. By 3 a.m., exhaustion blurred everything. The calls came every few minutes. Sometimes silence, sometimes breathing. Once a whisper. "He's still waiting." She tried unplugging the switchboard, but the lights kept flashing, glowing through dead wires. At dawn, Gary returned. He found her sitting on the floor behind the desk, phone in her lap, eyes red. She tried to explain, but he just frowned and walked over to the room himself. She followed a few steps behind. When he unlocked the door, the smell hit again. He wrinkled his nose. "I told them to seal this one up," he muttered. The bed was stripped bare now, the lamp off. The cord of the phone was coiled neatly on the table. No mirror on the wall, just a pale square where it had been removed long ago. Jenna stared, speechless. "It was all here last night," she whispered. Gary didn't look surprised. "You're not the first," he said quietly. "Every new clerk gets calls from that room. Some answer, some don't. But if you ever hear the name Hanlon again, don't pick up." She wanted to ask why, but his face told her not to. As he turned to leave, she caught sight of a faded photograph. Tacked behind the door, a group of smiling guests, their clothes old-fashioned. One of them, a tall man in a gray suit, stood by the window of that same room. Under the photo, written in pen, was a name: Walter Hanlon. That night, when Jenna came in for her next shift, she noticed something waiting on the counter. The key to room 6. Clean, polished as though freshly issued. The switchboard light blinked once. Room-to-room call. Line 6. She stared at it until the ringing stopped. But when she looked up at the monitor, the hallway view had changed. The door to room 6 was open again, and for the briefest second a figure stood there. Tall, still gray suit shining faintly in the glow of the exit sign. Then the feed cut to static. The stretch of Highway 16 that runs south of Medina is the kind of road most people forget as soon as they're off it. It cuts through limestone hills and dry brush, winding past ranch gates, abandoned gas stations, and low-water crossings that smell faintly of iron and algae. That night, Mark Henson had been driving it alone in a borrowed pickup, his rifle case rattling in the back, the taste of gas station coffee clinging bitterly to his tongue. He had spent the day hunting on leased land west of Bandera and hadn't bagged anything but mosquitoes. By the time he passed the flickering light of the old rest stop sign, it was close to midnight and the fatigue hit him all at once. His eyes burned, his shoulders ached, and the thought of another hour on that twisting highway made him feel dizzy. The rest stop looked deserted. Just a cracked asphalt lot, a line of dim yellow lamps buzzing overhead, and a single low building with a vacancy sign glowing a tired red. The letters in Rest Stop Motel were half burned out, so it read, Stop Moti. There were 3 parked cars, all coated in a layer of dust thick enough to blur their colors. He pulled in, figuring it was one of those places that hadn't been properly updated since the 90s but offered a cheap bed. Inside, the front office smelled like old carpet cleaner and fried oil. Behind the counter sat an elderly man in a plaid shirt, his skin pale and thin as onion paper. Mark signed the register with the stub of a pen. The man didn't ask for ID, just pushed a tarnished key across the counter. Room 7, he said, his voice thin. Don't mind the noise from the highway. It dies down after 1. There was no traffic out there, but Mark nodded anyway and carried his duffel through the cold air to a row of doors. Room 7's paint was peeling, the brass numbers dull. The door opened with a shriek and the room smelled faintly of mildew and pine sol. Inside, the decor looked frozen in time. Flowered curtains, a crooked lamp, a humming wall unit that blew out cool air no matter how he adjusted the dial. He didn't bother unpacking, just dropped his bag, stripped to his t-shirt and stretched out on the bed. The mattress was thin, the pillow smelled faintly of bleach, but exhaustion dulled everything. He left the light on, meaning to turn it off after a minute, but his eyelids got heavy, and he drifted off staring at the water stain spreading like a continent across the ceiling. He dreamed. In the dream, he was standing in a dim hallway facing a locked door. He could hear someone crying on the other side, the sound muffled but urgent, and before he knew it, he was pounding on the wood, shouting for them to open up. His fist slammed again and again until his knuckles split and bled. The sobbing stopped and something whispered close to the crack of the door, a voice so soft he almost didn't hear it. Then there was silence, thick and endless. He woke with his heart hammering. The clock said 3:17 a.m. The lamp flickered once, as if reacting to his breath. He sat up, rubbed his face, and noticed the ache in his hands. When he looked down, the skin over his knuckles was swollen and bruised, faint purplish marks that throbbed when he flexed. He stared at them in disbelief, rubbing the skin, half expecting it to fade like remnants of a dream. But the pain was real, the bruises hot under his touch. A low thud came from the hallway outside, another. Then a dragging sound. He froze, listening. The noise stopped. He told himself it was pipes or maybe another guest returning late. Still, when he opened the door, the hallway was empty. The air smelled faintly of something sour like wet earth and iron. He backed inside, shut the door, and locked it. Sleep wouldn't come again. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his hands until dawn crept through the curtains. When he stepped outside, the world felt gray and hollow, like it had been emptied out during the night. The cars that had been there were gone, leaving dusty outlines in the gravel. The old man in the office was dozing behind the counter. Mark hesitated, then lifted his hand. "Hey," he said, "you got anybody else staying here last night?" The old man blinked at him, eyes clouded. "Not many folks this time of year," he muttered. "Why, you ask?" "Thought I heard someone," Mark said. "Like a door slamming." The old man shook his head slowly. "All them doors been sealed a while. We only keep 7 and 8 open." Mark frowned. "Sealed?" "Water damage," the man said, his tone flat. "Back in '96, roof collapsed over the east wing. Ain't safe to walk there no more." The rest of the day was clear and windless. He hunted for hours and bagged nothing again. That night back at the motel, he checked his knuckles. The bruises had darkened, small scabs forming where the skin had broken. He thought of the dream and tried to laugh it off, but unease prickled at him like a low fever. Sleep took longer to come. The highway outside was dead silent. When he finally drifted off, the dream began again. This time he was in the same hallway but closer to the door. He could see scratches on the frame, dark smears like old blood, and the knob rattled under his hand. Someone whispered from the other side. He couldn't tell if it was pleading or mocking, but the sound crawled down his spine. He slammed his fists against the wood again and again, shouting until the skin split and the door gave way. He woke with a shout, breath ragged, and saw the curtain blowing inward though the window was shut. The lamp flickered, then steadied. His hands were worse and was split at the knuckles, streaked with something that looked too dark to be just blood. He turned toward the window and saw movement in the reflection. Someone was standing behind him in the glass, just a faint silhouette in the shape of a man. He spun, but the room was empty. By morning, the reflection was gone. The manager wasn't at the desk. The office smelled of coffee and dust, and a note sat on the counter in shaky handwriting. Pay box outside. He dropped his key and drove off, hands trembling on the wheel. He made it back to Medina and went to a small diner near the square. When the waitress asked where he'd stayed, he mentioned the Highway 16 rest stop. Her face went blank. "That place?" she said. "It burned down years ago. Lightning hit the roof. 2 people died inside. One of them a guest who went crazy in the middle of the night. They said he was pounding on some locked door trying to save a woman who wasn't really there." Mark stared at her, mouth dry. "You sure?" She nodded. "They never rebuilt it. Just a few concrete slabs left. Locals say sometimes you can see the lights out there, but it's just stories." He left his coffee untouched, went outside, and stared south down the highway where the hills shimmered in the sun. His hands ached under the bandages he'd wrapped around them, and as he flexed his fingers, the bruises seemed to pulse like something alive under the skin. That night back home, he dreamt again of the hallway, of the locked door and the soft whisper behind it. When he woke, there was dust on his boots as if he'd been walking on that broken asphalt road again, and faint fingerprints on the inside of his window pressed from the outside looking in. The storm came out of nowhere, rolling across the Texas hill country like a living thing. Rain hammered the windshield as Derek and Melanie pulled off Highway 87, wipers fighting a losing battle against sheets of water. They'd been driving from San Antonio toward Mason, visiting her parents for the weekend, but the road had vanished beneath the flood. When they saw the flickering sign of the Lone Spur Motel, a small L-shaped building with faded stucco walls and a humming neon vacancy sign, they didn't think twice. They just wanted shelter. Inside, the clerk was an older man in a brown cardigan who smiled like someone trying too hard. He slid a clipboard across the counter, his hand trembling slightly. "Storm's gonna sit over us all night," he said. "Lucky you pulled in early. Room 12's open, far end of the hall." Derek handed him a credit card. The clerk looked at it for a beat too long before running it through the machine, then nodded. "Generator's out back if the power goes. Doesn't happen often." He said it like a rehearsed line. They took the key and trudged down the long hallway, lined with mustard yellow walls and framed photos of bluebonnets. The carpet squished faintly underfoot. The hum of rain on the roof was constant, broken only by the occasional low boom of thunder. Room 12 was small but tidy. 2 twin beds, a dresser, a static-covered TV. A small window looked out onto the parking lot where their car glistened under the yellow light. Melanie dropped her purse and flopped onto the bed. "God, I hate driving in this," she said. Derek checked his phone. No signal. He turned on the small lamp by the bed and it flickered once before steadying. "Guess we'll ride it out here," he said. They tried to relax. The rain softened for a while and the motel felt almost cozy, until the first flash of lightning killed the lights. The room went black. Melanie gasped. Thunder cracked so close it rattled the window. A few seconds later, a deep hum began from somewhere outside. The generator had kicked in. The ceiling light flickered on again, dimmer this time, casting a yellow haze. "See?" Derek said. "They've got backup." But before he finished the sentence, they heard it. A slam, then another, then another. Every door in the hallway closed at once. It was so perfectly synchronized that it made the air vibrate. They both froze. "Wind," Melanie said softly, as if saying it out loud would make it true. Derek stood and opened the door. The hallway was empty. Every door was shut tight, the air heavy with that strange, charged silence that follows thunder. He stepped out and listened. The rain had returned, a hard drumming on the roof. No footsteps, no voices, just that steady hum from the generator. He walked a few steps down the hall and noticed that the lights flickered slightly, in rhythm with the humming. When he turned back, Melanie was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed. "Don't," she said. "I'm serious. Just come back inside." He did, closing the door behind him. They tried to ignore it. The TV was dead, no signal from the cable box, and their phones still had no service. Derek sat by the window staring out at the parking lot. The clerk's old truck sat by the office, its headlights reflecting off the puddles. But the lobby lights were off. "I'm gonna check something," Derek said. "No," Melanie said, sitting up. "We're staying here. The storm's too bad. I just want to see if anyone else checked in." That was a lot of doors. He stepped back into the hallway before she could argue. It was colder now, the hum louder, like it was pulsing from the walls. He tried one of the other room handles, locked. Another, locked. When he leaned down to look under the first door, he saw faint light flickering inside. Candlelight, maybe. Shadows moved across the bottom of the door. Then, just as suddenly, the light went out. He took a step back, his stomach tightening. The hum deepened, like the generator had changed pitch. He hurried back to their room, but when he reached it, the number 12 was gone. He blinked, stepping back. The brass numbers on the door were missing, leaving just 2 clean rectangles in the dust. He opened it anyway, relief flooding him when he saw Melanie inside. "What the hell?" she said. "You scared me." He looked behind the door. It was blank. "The numbers are gone," he said. "What?" "The room number." "It's just gone," she frowned. "Derek, you're freaking me out." He rubbed his eyes. Maybe it fell off, but his voice didn't sound convinced. Another slam echoed down the hall. This time not all at once, but one after another, like something was moving down the corridor, closing doors as it passed. Closer. Closer. Until it stopped right outside their room. Melanie grabbed his arm. They waited. Then with a soft metallic click, their doorknob turned. Slowly. Derek lunged for it and locked the latch, his heart hammering. "Hello?" he called. No response. The knob turned again, harder this time. Then silence. They stood there for what felt like a full minute. Then the hum cut out. Total darkness swallowed the room. The rain and thunder filled the space where the generator's steady drone had been. "Derek," Melanie whispered. He fumbled for his phone flashlight and turned it on. The beam shook in his hand. The air felt heavy, damp. The smell of wet carpet was stronger. He went to the window. The parking lot was empty. The clerk's truck was gone. Even their car wasn't there. Just puddles reflecting occasional flashes of lightning. "That's not possible," he said. "We parked right there." Melanie was by the bed, trembling. "Let's go. Let's get our things and go." "Go where?" he said. "We can't even see the road." "I don't care. I want out of here." When they opened the door, the hallway was darker than it should have been. The emergency lights had failed. Only faint blue lightning flashes illuminated it through the front office window at the far end. The air smelled like ozone and mildew. They moved quickly, passing doors that now all stood slightly open. Inside each there were glimpses. Bedsheets rumpled, lamps knocked over, wet footprints leading in and out. No people, no sound. As they neared the lobby, the generator kicked back on with a low groan. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. Every door behind them slammed shut in perfect unison again. Melanie screamed. Derek spun around, the flashlight sweeping across the hall. All the numbers were gone from the doors now, leaving only clean, pale squares on the wood. He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the office. The front counter was empty, but the guest ledger sat open. Only one line was written. Room 12, Derek and Melanie Harris. Check-in 10:41 p.m., check-out 3:00 a.m. Derek checked his watch. It was 2:56, his throat went dry. "Mel, look at this." She stared, shaking her head. No, that's not real. The second hand on his watch ticked slowly toward the hour. From behind them came the low sound of something moving, dragging along the floor. The hum of the generator deepened again, vibrating through their feet. Derek looked back toward the hall. Shadows pooled at the far end, darker than the space itself, and with every flicker of the light, the shape seemed closer. A thin human outline, shoulders crooked, head tilted. It was moving without walking, sliding. He grabbed Melanie and ran toward the glass doors, but when he pushed them open, rain didn't hit them. Wind didn't touch them. Beyond the doorway was only blackness. Not night, just nothing. He stepped back, horrified, as the air behind him grew colder. Melanie screamed his name, and then the lights went out again. When the power returned at dawn, the clerk found the lobby empty. The ledger was open, blank. Room 12's key hung neatly on the hook behind the counter. He checked the hallway, doors shut, rooms undisturbed. Outside, the generator hummed softly as the rain lightened to a drizzle. He sighed, rubbing his temples, then turned toward the window. 2 wet footprints led away from the door across the lot, stopping at an empty parking space that hadn't seen a car in years. I told myself it would be one night and then I would be on the road again, away from the low limestone hills and the slow, dark ribbon of the river. that kept slipping in and out of sight along the highway. The sun had dropped behind the scrub oaks outside Kerrville, leaving the Guadalupe to collect the last light, and my eyes were burning from the long drive from Houston. A sign with a flickering E in motel promised vacancy in cable, and I took it because it was there, and because I was tired of the sound of my own tires humming over the tar snakes that stitched the asphalt. The lot smelled like hot rubber and after rain, even though it had not rained. The sky had the pale look it gets when the air is holding back something. Inside the office, an oscillating fan moved a sheet of paper taped to the counter back and forth like a slow metronome. The woman behind the glass looked up as if waking. Her hair was white in a way that made me think of cotton bolls, wild and gathered at the same time. She pushed a clipboard under the gap and asked for a card. When I signed, the tip of the pen snagged the paper at the place where I wrote my last name, and I felt a pinch of irritation at that small resistance, the way it catches and leaves a shallow tear. I said I needed quiet. She smiled without showing teeth and said most folks do. She gave me a key card and a plastic tag with a number and a little silver key on a ring. The key, she said, was for the adjoining door if I had company, then looked at me the way people look when they are guessing at your life and trying not to seem like they are. I said I was alone. She said, then you will not need it, and pushed the tag back, the key rattling against the counter. I heard something vibrate under her desk and realized it was the compressor for a soda cooler. A low, steady thrum that made the neon buzz a little. The room smelled like old shampoo and wet concrete under paint. The bedspread had a pattern of green leaves that tried to be cheerful and looked tired instead. There was a door set into the wall beside the nightstand with a knob and a padlock on my side. The little silver key fitted, though I did not try it. Through the wall, or through the thin seam around the frame, came a cooler breath, as if that room held the shadow of an air conditioner that no longer ran. On my side, a framed print of a longhorn above a golden field hung crooked. I straightened it and immediately wanted to put it back the way it had been, but could not remember the exact tilt. I put my bag on the dresser and turned on the TV to a weather report pulling a line of radar across a cartoon Texas. The blue line thickened to green and yellow over the hill country. The meteorologist used words like cell and training and kept pointing to a point west of Bandera where the colors bled and refilled. The crawl said a flood watch would begin after midnight. I told myself I would sleep through it. Sometime after 11, I woke to a sound I could not name. It was not the compressor or the ice machine or the tires on the highway. It was in the smooth register of machines, but broken by pauses that felt human. A roll, a stop, a roll, a stop, and the light squeak of something rubber passing over a flat surface. I lay still with the ceiling fan cutting the air into slices and counted the beats between movements. The space was never the same. The roll ran longer as if crossing the length of the room and then shorter as if turning back. I sat up and held my breath, and the sound stopped and then resumed like it had been waiting until I moved. There was the faintest chain sound, a metal kiss on metal, not a clink but a soft pull and release. I told myself someone had checked in late and was moving a luggage cart. The thought felt reasonable until I remembered the corridor outside my door ran the other way, and there was no other door on this side except the one at the end that led outside to the ice machine. The sound was where the adjoining room would be. The padlock on my door was warm under my fingers. I pressed my ear to the seam. The cool draft smelled like river water and mildew. I called the front desk. The ring made a hollow note as if the sound had more room to bounce around in than it should. The same woman answered. I asked if someone had checked into the room next to mine. She asked for my number, and when I told her, she paused in a way that made me think she had put her hand over the receiver. She said there was no one in the adjoining room. She said housekeeping kept it closed. I told her I could hear movement. She said sometimes the air units cycle in the closed rooms and they make odd vibrations. I said this was rolling and stopping like wheels and the soft sound of something wet being dragged. I heard the scrape of her chair. She said she would send maintenance in the morning. I told her I would not sleep through the night if it kept up. She said it would settle down. Then she said, if it did not settle down, she would find me another room, and then she said there were no other rooms, but she would figure something out. I said thank you and hung up and felt ridiculous saying thank you to the sound through the wall. When you are alone in a motel room in a town where no one knows your name, and you have told no one which exit you took, your mind will try on every story it can to see which one fits tightest. The sensible ones feel loose at first, then the scary ones cinch in without your permission, and you find yourself holding your breath for the next roll because you have already decided it is not a cart and not the air. I turned the TV up and the picture went to snow for a moment and then came back. The clock on the microwave blinked 12 and I realized it had lost time. My phone buzzed with a weather alert and the room lightened. Then the rain began in sudden close drops against the window. The rolling took on a steadier rhythm now. A push, a glide, a push, and I could hear the faint suction sound of wet rubber on concrete. I turned off the TV because it was worse pretending not to listen. I took the silver key off the ring and held it without knowing what I would do with it. There was a moment in the sound like a turn, and in that turn the subtle bump of something heavy hitting the baseboard. A smell came through then, not just river water but something colder, like the air that comes out of a walk-in refrigerator. I pictured a maintenance man storing a dolly and a crate in there, the wheels leaving streaks of moisture, the crate dripping onto a mattress someone had left behind. That picture held for a second and then fell apart, without a good reason. The rain beat a steady pattern and the rolling and stopping set its own, and I found that my breath was trying to match it the way you match your step to a stranger on a sidewalk. I sat on the edge of the bed and felt the springs answer me. The longhorn print on the wall now had a small bead of water under the frame, a trick of condensation that made me think the wall was sweating. The air tasted like pennies. I tried the adjoining door handle. The padlock let the knob move, but the door was stuck in the frame, paint sealing paint, and I realized there was no give because there might not be a latch on the other side. I pulled my hand away and the sound stopped. Then there was a small tapping that made no sense at first until I saw my glass of water on the bedside table. The surface rippled. The tapping was the water against the glass. I slept and dreamed I was driving past a low water crossing with the horizontal stripes painted on the pole that warns you how deep the water is. The night was clear in the dream, and I could see the washed-out gravel on either side where the last flood had dug at it like fingers. There was a mattress on the road, bloated and white, and it moved with the current like an animal breathing. When I woke, there was a spray of water on the floor by the adjoining door, small dark dots that reached a foot into my room, and my shoes were damp inside, though I could not remember stepping anywhere wet. It was almost dawn. The rain had gone to a fine mist on the glass. The rolling had slowed to long, tired pushes, and then it stopped as if whatever had done it had decided it was finished for the night. I waited until 7 and went to the office. The white-haired woman had a different look in daylight, not softer, only clearer. Her eyes were pale and quick, the way the eyes of people who work nights get, always trying to make sense of shapes after too many hours of dim. I told her the sounds had gone on most of the night. She nodded in a way that admitted she had heard this before and said she would send Ray. She said it like his name was a tool she trusted. He came down the walkway with a pry bar in one hand and a ring of keys big enough to be a cartoon. He was in his 50s, maybe. Sunburnt around the edges, and his boots were stained with that permanent wet dark at the seams that you get when you work around hoses and drains. We stood at my door and he listened. The only sounds now were the drip off the eaves and the distant highway murmuring like a long held-out sigh. He put his ear to the adjoining door and then stepped back and looked at the lock. He said it had been painted a lot. He said whoever painted it last did not want it opened. He put the pry bar between the frame and the slab and leaned in slow. Paint snapped in a row of tiny dry clicks. The slab shifted. He put the pry in again above the latch and leaned, and the door came away and stuck again at the top where a line of swollen wood held it. He worked it free and the cool, dark air of the other room came into mine. There was no bed. There was a mattress on the floor, stained a wide gray that had a darker outline like the shadow of a lake when the water has dropped. The concrete around it was darker too, and the dark was not random. It was parallel arcs like the curves of tires that had turned and turned and turned in the same confined space. The arcs overlapped near the wall by a low patch of peeled paint that looked like water had run down it and settled there. The smell was high and wet and old. Ray clicked the light and nothing happened. He stood with the pry bar down by his side and shook his head once. He stepped in, put his palm to the wall and drew it away with a little membranous sound. He said there was a rumor that there used to be a roll-up door there in the back, when the building was a warehouse before it became a motel. He said if you look at the cinder block from the outside, you can see where they filled it in. He said housekeeping stored mattresses here sometimes when they did a swap and the floor sweats. He said a lot of things that were probably true in parts, and none of them felt like the whole of what I had heard. He noticed the arcs then. His jaw moved like he was chewing something that did not break down. He said maybe someone brought a bicycle in and rode it around. He said it in a way that meant he did not think that was what it was. I asked if there had been flooding. He said the river had come up 3 times in his memory, and the last time it took a truck off the low road by the pecan orchard. He said they did not find the truck for 2 days because it was pinned under a bend in the river, where the concrete drops into a bowl. He said they brought it up and it was full of leaves and the smell was wrong and that people's smell stays in metal. He said he had told the owner to tile the storage room because concrete will hold what water gives it and not let go. He stood in the doorway with me and we looked at the arcs in the mattress and the place where the wall had shed a film of paint onto the floor. He said he would lock it again. I said maybe I should take another room. He said he could put me on the other side if I wanted, but it was smaller, and he looked like he hoped I would say no. I told him I would be gone after tonight. I told myself the morning had made it ordinary. He relocked the door with a new hasp and a new padlock he had in a brown cardboard box. When it clicked shut, the air in my room seemed to settle, as if something had been held open the whole time and now that force had gone slack. I went into town and walked the little shops that sell wind chimes and agate slices and candles that smell like pie, and tried to put myself in the world of people buying small pretty things. But I kept hearing the roll and the stop and the soft peel of wet rubber. I ate a sandwich and watched the water move under the bridge, green on green, and my hand smelled like the motel doorknob. Storm clouds sat out beyond the hills like waiting trucks. I told myself I would sleep with the TV on and a towel against the seam of the adjoining door, and I would not pay attention. At dusk, the weatherman was still pointing at the same fattening smudge west of Bandera. The radar colors looked like bruises. The sky slammed all at once at 9. Lightning rattled the glass and the TV blinked and held. The sound began a little after. It came first like a test, a push and a stop, and then it settled into the same rhythm as the night before with the same pauses that made no pattern you could count. I could hear the little hiss when the wheels turned through a puddle and then hit dry and dragged. The towel at the seam did nothing to stop the cold. I called the office and got the answering machine. I hung up. I went to the door and touched the padlock. It was cold like a coin dropped from a freezer. I stood there long enough that the fan above me ticked its chain against the light. Then the rolling stopped. It did not slow and stop, it just ceased as if a hand had lifted away. I waited for the next push and did not hear it. Instead, I heard a new sound from the other direction. A slow, quiet smell before a sound, really. The smell of wet stone and a hint of gasoline. Then a breath, the kind rooms give, deep in the walls. The other wall, the one without any door, had a hairline crack where the paint had pulled apart from summer to winter and back again. Now I saw a thin line of dark film there, like writing left on a chalkboard and wiped but not wiped well. My glass of water rippled again and a bead ran down from the rim to the ring it had made on the table. There was a soft bump under the bed, as if something heavy had touched the frame from outside the physics of the room. The bed moved a 1/4 inch across the vinyl, not enough to call a shift. Enough to tell my body every promise I had made myself about being calm was empty. The sound of rolling started up again, but not from behind the adjoining door now. It rose up from the floor itself, from under me and under the bed and under the table. The sound of wheels crossing a seam in the slab and finding new purchase. I stood with both feet on the floor and felt the vibration in my bones. The rain was hard again on the window and the neon outside flared and went dead and came back. Red smear on wet glass. I did something I had not done the night before. I slid the chain off and opened my door to the walkway. The storm hit my face like cold breath from a lung, but the corridor itself was a tunnel of dryness. The rooms along it glowed under their shades. Out at the edge of the lot, the highway made its long, steady breath. There were 3 cars in the lot. Mine, a tan pickup with a ladder rack, and an old sedan under the oak with leaves pasted to the windshield like damp hands. The oak was beating itself against the sky. The office light was on. I stepped back into my room and the sound underfoot stopped again, the way animals go still when the light catches them. When I closed the door, the sound resumed, only lightly now, like someone testing a brake. I spoke into the empty air the way people do when they are alone and want not to be. I said I am leaving in the morning. I said please stop. My voice broke the quiet and sounded like it belonged to the room more than to me. The rolling traveled to the adjoining wall again, then back, then under the window. Water pushed at the sill as if it were trying to come in through the bottom of the glass. I realized I was listening not only for the wheels, but for the weight they were bearing. for the soft shift that follows a mass. In that detail was the thing that turned the sound from a practical answer to a story I would not be able to throw away. There was weight, and it was the weight of a car or a truck moving within a space not big enough for it, but the space took it anyway. I did not want to see it. I wanted to know what the room would be when someone else looked at it. At first light, the rain slid off the roof in a tired sheet, and the clouds went the pale of old shirts. I had not slept. The floor was sticky where my feet had been. The towel at the door seam was wet and cold like raw fish. I waited until 8 and then went to the office again. A different man was there, younger than Ray, with a razor burn and a coffee stain on his shirt. I told him I needed to speak to Ray. He said Ray was out by the laundry. Ray came in wiping his hands on a rag that had been white at some point. His eyes had that bright, flat look of someone who had seen what he did not want to, and was still fitting it into the part of his brain where the day would go on. He asked if it had happened again. I said it had and that it had not stayed where it belonged. His jaw moved. He looked at the key rack and then at me and then at the log on the counter. He told the other man to bring the bolt cutters. He did not ask for permission. He walked with me to the room, and when we stood in front of the adjoining door, I could feel the cold through the paint even though the morning had a hint of heat already rising off the blacktop. He cut the new padlock like it was nothing. The door gave without the pry this time. The room on the other side had not rearranged itself to be sensible. The arcs of dark were thicker. The mattress looked heavier and had collected a film of grit and small leaves as if it had been moving through something and gathering it. There was a fresh wet sheen along the wall at about knee height, a line as perfect as a tide mark. On the concrete behind the arcs were faint strips of something that might have been tread if you leaned down and looked from the side so the light caught it. Ray did not do that, and neither did I. He simply stood, and we both thought of all the places water keeps secrets. In the curves under bridges, in the bowls the road makes at the low place where the county saves money by not building a culvert. I thought of the old sedan under the oak, and I knew with the kind of knowing you are ashamed of that if we scraped a finger along the tread of those faint strips, it would come away smelling like the bottom of a river and gasoline and something else that is not a smell until you have known it. Ray locked the door again and said he would put me on the other side, the small room at the end. He put me there without waiting for me to accept because he had decided some part of the decision belonged to him now. The new room had 2 twin beds and a painting of bluebonnets and a TV remote that did not match the TV. The window looked out at the oak. The old sedan was gone. The patch of oil where it had been was darker than the rest of the parking lot and had a rainbow slick running through one edge where the water ran over it. I lay down in my clothes and told myself I would not fall asleep, and I fell hard. The kind of drop where the body takes itself away to somewhere simpler, and the mind is left in a corridor waiting for news. When I woke, it was almost dark. I sat up and the room felt full, not with furniture or air, but with attention. The small noises of weather had fallen away to the distance, and all that remained was the slight set of the building in the ground. Then I heard it again. Not where it had been the night before, not even in the room I had left behind. It came from the wall at the head of the bed, from the place where the drywall had a hairline crack. Roll, stop, roll. The sibilant pass-through water that is not present and is present all the same. The bed trembled. The frame touched the wall and made that small press and release that the ear can find even in a storm. Something heavy shifted its weight to align itself with mine. I said Ray's name out loud, and the sound I made was eaten by the room. The rolling swelled and then became quiet, like an engine at idle. It is hard to explain what it is to know you are being listened to by something that ought not to be able to listen. It was like standing on a bridge and shouting and hearing someone shout back from under the water with your own voice worn down by silt. The cold reached me first through the sheet, then through the box spring, and then from under the bed where there should have been air and dust and a dropped receipt. I put my feet on the floor and it gave. Not a sink, not a break, just a give. The way soft dirt gives at the riverbank when you forget how close to the edge you are. I told myself to stand. The bed moved with me, not as a bed moves on plastic feet, but as a raft adjusts when a weight shifts to one side. The wall at my back went damp against my shirt. The crack in the paint widened a little and something like breath came through. Then there was the quietest kiss of rubber just against the baseboard by my ankle, as if a small tire had turned and paused there, considering. I grabbed my bag and the handle slipped in my palm because my hands were wet. I had not touched water. The zipper rasped like an insect. I left the bag and stepped to the door, and my feet made prints on the vinyl that shone and then faded. The door stuck the way wood sticks when the air is full of water. I pulled it open, and a gust of ordinary night air from the corridor broke the room's lungs. The rolling under me did not stop. It moved past the threshold of the door as if the boundaries were suggestions. I stepped out, and sunlight from the last part of the sky found the wet prints of my feet and turned them silver for a second. I ran, if you can call it running when your body feels like it is being moved along rather than moving. Down the corridor, past my old door, past the ice machine, to the office. The bell on the counter jumped under my hand. No one came out. Behind the counter, the door to the back was open. I stepped around and called out, and the room was empty. The TV in the corner of the office was on, and the picture was the bridge over the Guadalupe, half a mile away. A white sedan sat with its nose against the guardrail, water shoving at the tires. The camera pulled in, and you could see 2 stripes of black on the road where the rubber had left a last insistence. The anchor said there had been a recovery that morning. The corner of the screen held the date in white text. It was today. I watched the same 30 seconds loop, and I understood that I had misunderstood the arithmetic of the story all along. It was not that the sounds were repeating some old accident to remind the walls of what walls are for. The sounds were practicing like a tongue remembering language. They had learned my weight and my breath and the place where my bed would give. They had found me. And now they were making the room fit me the way water will take any shape you offer it if you lower it slow. I stood with my hand on the bell and listened, and I heard the roll and the stop move down the corridor toward me under the skins of the rooms, as if there were a wide, smooth place beneath the slab that none of the builders had planned, a space where things stored what they gathered in the dark. The neon in the window buzzed and died and came back. Outside, the oak leaves shivered and then hung still. I thought of getting in my car and driving without turning on the headlights until I hit the interstate. I thought of the low places in the road that hold water, even when the river is in its banks, and I pictured the way tire tracks look on wet concrete when they are new, and then the way they go pale, and the way your own prints step across them like you have stepped across something that watched you. At sunrise, Ray and the younger man and the white-haired woman came down the corridor with a master key and a crowbar. They opened the room I had left, and then the room I was in, and then the third one, because none of us could be sure now where anything was. In my room, the beds were crooked like 2 boats after impact. There was no furniture in the adjoining one on the other side. There was no furniture in mine either anymore. Not if you use the word as a dividing line between what belongs inside and what you only expect to see outside. There was only a damp mattress on the floor, heavy as if it had just come out of a river, and a wide circle of paler concrete inside a wider, darker ring like a pupil and an iris, and arcs where tires had turned and turned and turned in the space that had held me. They said my name as if I were in the next room and could answer through the wall. I was in the office with my bag and my keys in my hand, and water drying on the floor where I had stood. The door to the office was open to the morning, and the breeze moved the paper on the counter, and the bell made a small sound without being touched. The TV showed the bridge again, and then went to a commercial for a dealership in Bourne with smiling people shaking hands under a blue sky that did not belong to this place. I checked out without signing anything. The white-haired woman took the key and would not meet my eyes. Ray watched me go like someone watching a truck take a turn too fast on a wet road. I backed my car out slow. The tires made no sound I could hear over my blood. When I reached the highway, I did not look back. The sun was on the hills in a way that made them look like a photograph taken in another year. Somewhere behind me, a door was being relocked, and the slab was taking back what weight had been given to it, and the arcs were drying to a lighter gray that would take daylight, as if it were only light and nothing else. I drove until the road straightened and the smell of the river went out of the car. When I stopped for gas in Junction, I looked at the wet tires and the marks they left as I pulled away. Faint twin curves on the concrete that faded while I watched until there was nothing to prove they had been there. Everything translating itself into the story the ground prefers to tell. That night in a different motel, farther west where the air is cleaner and the stars come down close to the highway, I lay still and listened. The room was calm and new, and the window held a piece of sky like a kind of coin. For a long time there was nothing except the hum of the unit and the slow beat of the ice machine doing its simple work. Then the mattress under me answered in a soft way that was not a spring popping or a shifted seam. It was a careful readjustment, the way a raft settles to take a second weight. The wall behind the headboard felt colder than the rest. Somewhere deep in the slab, past the place where planners and builders put their drawings, Something rolled and stopped and found the pitch of my breath and matched it. I closed my eyes and did not move, and it moved with me. Not as a threat exactly, but as a promise that the shape we leave in a room is not ours alone. If I tell you I slept, it would be a kind of lie. If I tell you I left all the lights on and counted to a number that had no end, it would be closer. In the morning, I reached under the bed for my shoes and my hand came back damp. And I told myself it was the air unit. I told myself the desert holds a surprise coolness before dawn. I told myself I did not see the faintest half-moons of tread in the dust under the frame. I put on my shoes and walked out, and I did not look at the floor to see if it remembered me. I drove west because the map said there was nothing much out there for a while. The sky was clean and huge, and the road was straight and dry. And still, every so many miles, when the tar snakes whispered under the tires, I felt the bed in the room I had left give the smallest nod, and I knew that some doors in the places we sleep do not open or close the way we think they do. They breathe. They learn you. They never really let go. The year I learned to distrust my own face, I had been driving a long circle through the hill country, a loop of cheap motels and nameless diners, places where your coffee comes in white mugs that smell faintly like bleach, and you can watch summer storms hang in the distance like curtains. I was a field surveyor for a small insurance outfit in San Antonio, the kind of job where you take measurements in hot rooms after small disasters and try to sound sympathetic while figuring out the cheapest way to be generous. That week, the disasters were burst pipes and a roof that peeled up like a sardine lid in Medina. I was tired and just wanted a place to sleep between Bandera and Kerrville, something that would accept a corporate card that barely worked and a man who looked like he should be ordering 2 beers at once. I found the motel by accident. Highway dust had gathered in the crease of dusk, and the green signs passed like patient birds. The thunderheads that had lurked to the west all afternoon were finally deciding to throw a tantrum. It started with a few fat drops and then a steady drumbeat on the windshield. My phone lost service east of a town whose name I already forgot. When the red neon vacancy flickered behind some mesquite and a sagging wooden fence line, I took the turn like a man takes a hand offered in the dark. It was a single-story, U-shaped compound with doors that opened onto a cracked lot. The office had a bell that protested when I pushed the door. A calendar behind the desk said June, but the number squares were blank. The woman who checked me in had the look of someone who had been awake for several years. Her hair was pinned up with a pencil, and her eyes carried that dry shine of the underslept. She slid the register toward me, and I noticed the pages were clean. No indentations from names pressed hard with a ballpoint. No coffee stains. The pen she offered was new and light, and when I signed, my name looked unpracticed. "You'll be in 12, she said. "Far end, near the oak. No smoking. Ice machine works if you jiggle the plug. There a place to eat close by?" I asked. She tilted her head as if listening for the rain. "There's a diner up the road, open sometimes. Better bet is the vending machine by the laundry. Fresh as anything." I didn't ask about the rate because it already felt like a secret. The key was the old metal kind with teeth that looked cut by a pocket knife. On the way to 12, I noticed a smell that took a second to place. Newspaper. That old plant smell of pulped wood and old ink. It was heavy the way rain is heavy when it's not inside the room, but you can feel it thinking about coming in. The door stuck, and then gave. The room was perfectly ordinary in that way motels can sometimes be a relief. 2 beds with spreads patterned like a doctor waiting room, a dresser with a television the size of a suitcase, a little round table with 2 chairs that didn't match. The air conditioner rattled like a jar of bolts, but it put out cold air. I could live with rattling. I could live with many things. I tossed my bag on the far bed and reached for the light by the bathroom. That was when I saw the reason for the smell. Every reflective surface in that room was covered with newspaper. The big mirror over the sink, the long rectangle that usually makes a man feel like a stranger in his own shirt, was dressed in taped layers of the Bandera Bulletin and the Kerrville Daily Times and something in Spanish with photographs of horses. The television screen wore a skin of want ads, and the glass on the framed art print above the beds had been mummified in obituaries. Even the cheap plastic clock face had a square of newsprint taped dead center. The only uncovered glass in the room was the little window by the door, and even that had a film of something that turned the rain into chalk. For a good minute I just stood and took it in. I've stayed in places where the carpet was tacky from beer spills and one where the shower curtain was stiff as cardboard. This was new. I thought of the woman at the desk, the pencil in her hair, the way she didn't blink much. Motels have their rituals. They leave a chocolate on the pillow. They fold the towels like swans. This one covered its mirrors like someone had died. I peeled at the tape on the television because I wanted to hear voices while I ate crude snacks from a machine. The tape was layered, and whoever put it on had cared about doing it right. I got a corner up and heard the tacky whisper as it lifted. That was when the air shifted. It felt like the moment you open a freezer and the cold spills across your face, but without the cold. A memory of temperature. It raised the hair on my arms. Another thing. The lights hummed high in the fixtures, and the hum felt closer when the paper lifted. I told myself the paper was acting as a baffle and let it go. I pulled it away from the screen, balling it up. The television beneath was fine, black and reflective when off. It held my shape in a dull smear when I moved. The clock was easy. The art print was stubborn. The bathroom mirror stopped me. It wasn't that it mattered more. It was that I could see where the tape had been replaced layer upon layer, like someone constantly retied a bandage. The date on the outermost page was last week. The dates beneath went back months. I went to the office. The rain had become a steady veil, and the smell of wet limestone rose from the lot. Someone had left their door open at 8, and a television glow bled out into the rain. I pushed the office door, and the bell gave that same unhappy chime. The woman was there with a jar of coins, counting and returning them like worries. "Everything all right in 12?" she asked. Her tone suggested she had read an answer to the question long ago and did not enjoy the ending. "The mirrors are covered," I said. "All the glass. Is that for remodeling, or is it a thing you do here?" She lifted a coin and looked through the hole in its middle that wasn't there. "Policy," she said. "No mirrors, no glass faces, no black screens after sundown. You can peel the television if you want to watch it, but tape it back when you go to sleep. I've got a roll by the coffee." She pointed to a dispenser that had seen a lot of use. "May I ask why?" She stared at me for a time that stretched. "Because reflections learn," she said. I waited for her to smile the way people do when they've told a dry joke and now want to test if you'll join them. She didn't. She slid the jar aside and pulled a ledger from under the counter, the kind with thin paper and triplicate sheets. She opened it to the back where a few pages had handwriting. The names were neat, but different pens had been used. There were dates next to some and a line through others. "You're the fourth in a month to ask," she said. "People don't like to not see themselves these days. They want proof they're still here. But this place had trouble when folks could look too long. I cover the glass because I keep the rooms. I keep the rooms because that's my job. Leave it alone and you'll sleep. Trouble how?" As if answering would tip some balance, she reached to the calendar with the blank squares and touched the top corner. "Hail took our roof in March," she said, which was a lie you could hear trying to walk on two legs. I thought about the dates under the newspaper and the way the tape was layered like tree rings. She kept not blinking. I went back to 12 with a roll of tape I didn't ask for. Maybe I meant to tape the screen back after the weather report. Maybe I meant to be reasonable. I pulled the vending machine's Wonder Feast from a coil and took it with me. I used my key to lift the ice machine plug and push it back in exactly as she had described, which made it noise and spit white cubes with the satisfaction of a dog that finally got to bark. Inside, I ate chips and watched a man in a suit explain rainfall totals with the soothing voice of someone who had never been caught out in any of it. The storm cell over us had stalled. Lightning stitched the hills to our west, but it was more embroidery than attack. When I turned on the bathroom light, the big mirror was a wall of paper faces. Headlines about high school baseball and a car show in Bourne shared tape with columns about a missing man named Carlos, whose family begged for tips. His photograph had been printed so many times that the dots made a kind of gray haze around his eyes. There are parts of us that don't like being told no, especially when the thing is small and we are alone. The switch was muscle memory. You stand at a sink, you look up. Not seeing yourself pulls on a string you didn't know ran through your spine. Out of all the newspaper corners I could have chosen, my fingers found the one at the lower right, close to where a sink splash had dampened the tape so it would lift easy. I didn't tell myself I would only tear a little. I didn't lie. I just lifted the corner and I looked. The hole was the size of my palm and what looked back was me. I wish it had been something else at once because then I would have left. The man in the mirror was me, tired in the eyes. Decent line of stubble, hair that needed a barber who would talk about high school football while he trimmed. My shirt was the same. The way my mouth turned against one side when I was thinking I might be wrong was the same. The hole was bordered by the soft hair of newsprint, and our eyes met the way a person's eyes meet when they are trying to confirm they are not the problem. I lifted my hand to widen the hole, and my reflection did not. Its hand twitched, stopped, then lifted a second later. It was slight enough to pretend it hadn't happened. I looked over my shoulder at the room in the mirror, the way a man checks a photograph for proof of a background detail. The towel on the rack had a stain that looked like an off-center map of Texas, and mine did too. The door was closed behind him as it was behind me. A drop of water moved down the mirror in his room, and a drop moved down mine. The frame was the same cheap wood wrapped with paper veneer. I scratched my cheekbone, and he scratched his a moment after I was done. The space between was long enough to notice and short enough to doubt your noticing. I widened the hole. Tape lifted with a reluctant sigh. The paper cling made the mirror foggy around the edges, and I could not tell where the glass ended and the story began. He caught up to me, then fell behind. It was like watching a broadcast with a lag when the signal goes through a tired satellite. I told myself there could be an explanation. I could be tired enough to notice the slight delay in my own movement. Maybe the angle made the alignment weird. The mind can be generous when it wants to be comfortable. The man in the mirror ran his tongue across his back molar with that micro-concentration face I despised when I caught it in morning mirrors. I didn't do that. My tongue sat heavy in my mouth like a piece of cut fruit. I stepped closer. He stepped closer after me. The delay was always there, and it had a rhythm like a skipped line in a song you think you know. I reached my index finger into the paper frame and laid it against the glass. Cold. My reflection did the same. But when I pressed, he pulled away, half an inch, wary like an animal deciding if a fence is electric. It was not the kind of wrong you can call the front desk about. I took my hand back and lifted the edge a little more. I had made a rectangular slit now, not big, enough for both my eyes and a mouth. I watched my breaths cloud the sliver of glass and recede. I smiled to see if I could coax a smile back. His mouth didn't lift exactly where mine did. One corner lagged. Then deliberately, he flattened his features like he was waiting for me to finish my joke. In another life, I would have gone to the office with the tape roll and told the woman politely but firmly that I required a different room. In that same life, I would have checked my watch, remembered I had to be in comfort by 8, and slept in my truck with a towel over my face. But curiosity is hunger. It feeds itself. There is also a stripe in most men that doesn't want to be afraid of a small weirdness. Once you accept one small weirdness, what stops the next? I widened the tear until I could see down to my chest and shoulder. I tilted my head left and right, slow, and watched him hesitate, then match. I lifted my belt buckle and set it down. He was a half beat behind. When I stepped back very fast, he startled like he had been leaning in to hear me and had been caught doing it. The rain eased. In the quiet, the room had a sound like held breath. I heard footsteps on the sidewalk outside, the pace of someone coming from the ice machine, and then moving past as if deciding against going back the way they came. My television murmured to itself in the other room, and somewhere a toilet flushed with the exhausted wind of old pipes. A moth practiced the window screen. I looked into the hole and found him waiting at the exact distance I was. I thought of the covered mirrors in all the other rooms, the television screens, the clock faces. The clock in my room had been turned from a thing that measures your life in red digits to a blind square. The impulse to uncover that too pulsed. It came with the heat a gambler feels after losing and deciding this will be the bet that writes everything. I don't gamble. I don't even buy scratch-offs when the cashier says the pot is ripe. But this felt like a dare written in the room's bones. I pulled the tape from the top of the mirror in one smooth draw, and the rest of the paper sagged, then gave. He didn't move during that long pull. His stillness felt intentional. When the page dropped and I saw myself completely, he tilted his head a fraction. Our stances matched now, and that made the delay frightening in a new way. My shoulders were a touch squarer than his. His were rounder, as if he carried a weight I couldn't see. There was a bruise above his right wrist, a low oval the color of old plums. I didn't have that bruise. It took a second to register. I raised my right hand to show the absence, and he raised his left. That could have been the mirror. Reflection flips. But when I traced the edge of my jaw, he traced the edge of his jaw on the same side as my fingers. It was not just lag. It was a choice. He was choosing when to be a mirror and when to be a man. I turned away because the human mind can only hold that piano wire tension for a time. I told myself I needed the tape. The dispenser was on the table by the door. The television had gone to a commercial for a used car lot in Kerrville where each vehicle was described like a rescued dog. I thought of the woman telling me to tape things back before I slept. Tape it back! Like you could close a wound with tape. I took a length of tape long enough to span the mirror from one side to the other and went back. He stood near the glass now, closer than I would have stood if I had been him. Our noses were not close to touching. They were close enough to name. I lifted the tape and he watched. Then he raised his hand as if he meant to help. The sound of tape leaving the dispenser is one of those sounds that carries memories. Christmas mornings, moving boxes, gift bags at hospital doors. The tape rattled against its little plastic teeth and I smoothed it across the top edge of the mirror. The tape made a clean line and it felt like sealing something in. He lifted his hand and moved it toward the line like a man checking a window for drafts. His fingers were clean, nails short, scar on the knuckle where I had none. I put a second strip. I thought if I could cover the top and sides, I would have made some kind of rule again. I didn't want to watch myself all night. I didn't want to be watched. The third strip fumbled and stuck to my fingers. He didn't move to match, and the delay was suddenly gone. He stood there without copying me, and in that displacement I felt the way a room feels when you realize a picture frame has been crooked for days. Something thumped the wall behind the bed as if someone had sat too hard on it. The rain returned with a gust. The bathroom light flickered and held. I was breathing through my mouth. I have known fear in a few forms, and this one had the taste of old pennies. You can think you're too proud to be superstitious, and then you can learn you are not proud at all. He moved first. He raised his hand with the bruise and laid it flat against the glass at the very spot where my chest met mine. He held it there. It made an impression in the fog my breaths printed. The bruise looked not just like a bruise, but like an oval taken by force, the shape of a grip. I did not raise my hand to match, and when I didn't, he smiled a little sad, like he had figured out a thing on his own and wanted to show it to me slowly so I could catch up. I don't know when the thunder slipped closer. It had. The light from the room was enough to see the filaments in the bathroom bulb. When you give your attention to a mirror, the rest of the world tries to remind you it exists. There was a scratching at the window as of twigs in the wind. The ice machine clicked like a weak metronome. Somewhere a truck shifted gears and threw it sound like gravel. It all sat behind this moment, the engine noise under a song. He lowered his hand and began to lift his shirt. It was not erotic. It was clinical, the way a doctor asks you to show where it hurts. He exposed his ribs. Dark bands marked the skin like someone had pressed a cord into him while he was soft and not yet a man. The oval bruise on his wrist had a twin on the other side I hadn't seen before. He tilted so I could see the small notch above his hip bone and the white mark there that makes a person stop and wonder where in their life they met the thing that left it. I wanted to look away and I did not. He took something then from the pocket of his jeans. A key, not the kind attached to fobs in rental offices. A key like mine, heavy and old, numbers stamped into its face. He held it up. The number was 12. He weighed it in his hand as if testing whether it was still all there. Then he held it to the bottom edge of the mirror and angled it up so I could read it. I looked down at the real key in my palm, felt its cut edges, saw the same dents. He let his fall to the tile in his room, but there was no sound in mine. It settled like a thrown coin in water. I said a thing aloud. I said, "That isn't funny." It sounded like a childish protest even to me. He looked at my mouth, forming the words, and decided not to copy. He pressed his hand against the glass again, and in the press I felt a pressure, a responsive push against the skin on my chest that wasn't really there. It made me step back and he stepped forward. And for a sliver of a second our movements matched exactly. When that happened, something in the light shifted. The bathroom felt an inch deeper. The doorway felt further to the side. I thought of Carlos on the missing poster. I thought of the penciled hair like a pin in the woman's head. I thought of a roof peeled like a can lid. It all hung in a mobile above the idea that if I taped the mirror again, fast, I could make the world simple. More tape. The dispenser teeth protested. Sweat made my fingers slick and stupid. I laid a long strip across the middle of the glass and he watched it go down with a careful expression, then leaned forward and blew at it like you blow at a candle to see if maybe you are a ghost. The tape did not move. I imagined sleep. I pictured the alarm on my phone vibrating me into a simple morning. Breakfast someplace with eggs, This room done with me, I could have left then. The door was closed. My bag already had my kit packed. There is a chapel in my head where an earlier version of myself watches me and whispers, "Go." He is disappointed a lot. He is a kind man whose advice I keep refusing. I put down the dispenser and placed my palms on the edge of the sink and held my weight there. He mirrored that exactly, and in the match I expected to feel better. I didn't. The cold from the porcelain crept like a tide into my hands. His eyes went to something over my right shoulder. Not the door. A point a foot to the left of the frame where the wall has no feature. He watched it the way you watch a relative try to stand. Then he looked back at me and reached to his pocket again and lifted his phone. It was the same model as mine. Same case, same crack creeping like frost from the bottom corner. He turned it so I could see the black screen. He pressed the button. The screen lit with my lock screen image. The Guadalupe River under the bridge at Hunt. Taken in late spring when the cypress are arrogant and green. On his phone it wasn't that. It was a motel hallway with a dirty runner and doors the color of old coffee. The time display was wrong by 1 minute. He held the image up like a man returning something you dropped. And then he flipped his camera and pointed the lens at me. There is a thin shudder you feel when someone takes your photograph without asking. It's almost nothing. It is a small recognition that part of your face belongs to the world now. He held the phone near the glass as if the barrier shouldn't matter and pressed the shutter. His camera made no sound. Mine on the table in the other room whispered nothing. He let me see the picture. It was me but softer, an image barely out of registration as if his hand had trembled because the person he photographed had stepped between poses at the last moment. Enough, I said. I aimed to make it light, a stop all this and knock it off sort of tone. It came out like prayer. He raised his free hand, palm out. He showed me the center of it, which was pale. He made a small gesture like lowering a window shade. Then his mouth formed a syllable I recognized from my own throat when I reassure a skittish dog. He put the phone down on the edge of his sink. He leaned his forehead very gently against the mirror and he closed his eyes. The storm found its stride. Lightning walked somewhere across the ridge and the power whispered once, twice, then stayed. A sound ran along the wall behind the mirror. The travel of pipes waking. I could hear the other guests again in stutters and edges. A cough, a heel, a clatter, then stillness as if they were all listening to me not walking away. The clock tucked its dead square face into itself. He opened his eyes and they were older. Not years older, but in the way sitting through a hard hour can take more than one. He closed his right hand into a fist and pressed it against the glass right in front of me. He did not hit. He didn't need to. The gesture was the idea of hitting. You see a fist near your chest and your heart gives small instructions to the rest of you. Now he smiled and it was not sad anymore. It was tender, or as close to tender as a thing like this can be. He flattened his hand and lifted it away, then spread his fingers and laid them back. His palm fit the fog print my breath had made, and when it found that outline, a pulse of cold pressed against my skin from nowhere. The tape at the top right corner lifted. It was nothing like a storm ripping a roof. It was an easy release, a sigh 1/2 inch. The rest lifted to follow as if obeying the first strip. "No," I said, and my voice was too loud in the small room. I grabbed the tape and pushed it back, smoothing it with my hand. His hand followed, smoothing from his side, and where his palm moved, the adhesive sealed harder as if he were helping. We did that a long moment. 2 men tamping down something we both had reason to fear, and it felt like a small trust you might begin. When my breath slowed, we looked at each other and did not speak. And I believed then that the night could end without me having to understand more. It is foolish to be grateful to a mirror, but I was. He nodded. He lifted his hand a final time and drew. In the fog, my last exhale left a small arc like the top of a lowercase letter. The arc faced downward, a smile on its head. I watched it be drawn and I didn't recognize it until his nail caught the end and continued the line and made it into a keyhole. He set his finger at the bottom of that shape and turned an imaginary key. Some doors are a posture and a decision. The room changed, not by moving, but by deciding to be arranged. I felt my weight go wrong. The reflection in the mirror did not change. The reflection stayed the same man with his shoulders a little round and that bruise on his wrist and a weariness I had resisted naming. The person standing at the sink in room 12 near the oak, with a rain smell coming through a chalky window, was now a speed of shadow that did not align with anything. I was looking at him through glass that was not glass anymore. I was not on the side with the faucet handle that leaks and the towel shaped like Texas, and the door that sticks. I was where reflections go when they finish practicing. He breathed in and it sounded like he had lungs for days. He lifted both hands and set them against the frame, and you could see him feeling the cheap wood veneer you can feel on every motel vanity across the state. He found the edge of the paper and pulled it the rest of the way down, and it came easily, because tape after tape had warmed to the idea of surrender. He looked himself over the way a man looks at a suit he only wears for weddings and funerals. He touched the bruise like a man checking a watch that has stopped. He looked back at the place where I was and gave me a look I have seen in old photographs of men leaving towns. It held apology and relief and a kindness that makes you hate it because there is nothing you can do with it. He lifted his key from the tile where it had made no noise and slid it into his pocket. Then he wiped his hand on his jeans and turned off the bathroom light. Darkness made the shape of his shoulders bigger. He walked past the television that was still tuned to the weatherman and showed a big white sweep over our county. He paused by the table and took my phone and that little roll of tape and put them both in his pocket. He opened the door. Rain spoke long words in the parking lot, and he stepped into it like a person finally stepping out of a photograph. I pounded the glass with fists that pushed back on me. The sound was swallowed. It was like shouting underwater in a public pool after hours. In the mirror world, the light was inside the glass, and the room that was my room sat behind it like scenery after a play. I could see the imaginary fog under my breath and the ghost of my moving hands. I could see into the room beyond where the bedspread waited, and the door shut gently to show it had learned how. I could see the clock blind, sitting with its empty face. I could see the window and the moth still practicing. Then I could see something else, because reflections learn slowly, but they learn. The bathroom in his world was just a bathroom. But this side had more rooms than were printed on the map. Behind the glass and under it and above it and beside it, once you let yourself turn, are many rooms and many sinks and many pairs of eyes at small holes. Some have tape that will hold for years. Some let go like a dress. The air has the flavor of old paper. You can smell the dates. Outside, footsteps crossed the sidewalk toward the ice machine. The door at 8 opened and closed. The woman at the desk counted coins in her jar. If she listened closely, she heard a bell that wasn't the one on her door. It was the small bell a person rings when they have finished washing their hands at the sink and want the mirror to tell them a thing they should not ask. I stood there and thought of that chapel in my head. The earlier version of me with his good advice. He was not there anymore. The person at the sink looked through me to himself and raised his fingers to his face to feel where he ended and began. He had no delay. He didn't need it. He looked like a man who would sleep even with the storm. He would ignore the odor of newsprint and let morning hurt in the ordinary way. He would wake with sunlight turning the water glass into a small oval of brightness, and his bruise would be the color of something else now. He would check out at the desk where the woman would write a number in a ledger and not meet his eyes. The world behind glass settled into its rhythm. Time moves differently there. Like a song played on an instrument with one broken string that you only notice when you try to sing along. For a while, the worst part was not shouting. The worst part was realizing I had wanted to know, and that the knowing had been simple. You lift a corner. You make a hole. You admit the delay. There is a moment where you think your face is still yours, and then you are on the wrong side of a decision that felt very small at some point deep in the blue part of the night, when the motel lot breathes out and the birds, not yet awake, and the storm rolled past to trouble other people. I saw motion in the mirror's deeper dark. Not him. A face in some other square and angle beyond the bathroom door. The face was a woman's, hair in a pencil, eyes dry. She pressed her hand to glass like she had done in practice and waited for someone to be curious. Her mouth made a word that could have been tape. Morning at those motels arrives like a second try. Light slides along the seam at the bottom of the drapes, and dust makes important decisions in that light. Somewhere water starts running. Somewhere a truck coughs to life. He will wake soon and think about coffee, and then he will decide against it, and he will check the time on my phone and find it 1 minute off and never fix it. He will drive onto Highway 16 and wonder if the sign for the diner up the road is honest, and he might stop and eat something with a sigh. The road will shake itself out, and the hill country will look green and muscular and full of places to get lost. He will not think about the newspaper until night, and by then he will be far enough that when he looks in any mirror, it will tell him only the things he already believes. Here behind the glass, you cannot smell the eggs at the diner or the bleach in the coffee. You can watch 100 rooms if you learn the trick of angles, and you can hear the hum of all the fluorescent bulbs. You can see the way people decide to touch tape and the way they decide not to. You can learn patience from the woman with the pencil. Reflections learn. That is what she said. It turns out they do, and so do we, even when we are done being the one who walks out the door into the rain.